me to just confirm that all of the members and persons anticipated on the call are present. I know we have Ted Blake, Sally Calhoun, Michael Daly, Sally Kearns, Michael Landers, Gina McCusker, and Paul Pollock here with me as members of the Finance Committee. Additionally, members of staff with us today are Town Manager Steve Bartha, our Finance Director Rodney Conley, and Assistant Town Manager Jen Breaker. Additionally, Alex Lent, the Director of the Library, Lisa Dana, the Superintendent of Danvers Public Schools, Keith Taverna, the Assistant Superintendent, Heidi Riccio, the Superintendent of the North Shore Technical High School, and Marisa Morosky, the Business Manager there, as well as Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. He is here, right?
Yes.
Okay. The Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, as well as Selectman Gardner Trask, are on the call. Additionally, a number of the members of the Danvers School Committee are here. This open meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Finance Committee is convening remotely via the WebEx app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda, unless I note otherwise. We'll now be turning to the first item on the agenda, which will be an overview of the budget by Steve Bartha. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. After each speaker on the agenda is introduced and they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called, much in the same way we conduct our regular Finance Committee meetings. Please remember when we're not speaking to have your phone or computer muted, and remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. And if members would like to engage with other members, please do so through the chair. Although it's a little unorderly, everyone will be unmuted for voting for voice votes. And if we have any confusion over a voice vote, we'll handle it at that time, but I don't foresee any difficulty. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to our town manager, Steve Bartha, for an overview of the budget. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Finance Committee, School Committee, Essex, friends from Essex Tech, and those watching at home. Meeting remotely is no substitute for meeting in person, but given the circumstances right now, it's the best we can do. I'm going to provide an overview of the budget process that brought us here, sort of where we are and how we got here. And then I'll provide an overview of our revenue situation, focusing specifically on what really has changed since our preliminary budget was developed earlier this year. And at that point, We'll have brief presentations from the library, Essex Tech, and the public schools. And then I'll provide a high-level overview of the town budget later in the presentation. And at that point, we would certainly welcome. I know all of the presenters would welcome questions throughout, but we can take detailed questions at that point from the committee. And the assistant town manager is monitoring our email address, which I believe those watching on DCAT should be able to see on their screen, as well as a phone number. And if you are a resident who wishes to ask a question or provide a comment, you can do so through the email that you see, or you can call the number, keeping in mind that the question is being transcribed and passed on to the chair. So brevity is gold, focusing in on the issues or the items that are of interest to you, so that we can hopefully answer those during the public comment period. So what I'd like to start with is kind of the overview. As I mentioned before, late last year, the fiscal 21 budget was shaping up to be a year where we would be able to achieve or advance several key budgetary goals that we've been focused on for some time. Those included implementing a split payroll conversion, which was a recommendation. Okay. That was not the auditor checking in to find out why we were abandoning that plan. Calling the auditors was one of the first things that we did after COVID-19 began, and we realized that adjustments were going to be required in the budget. So essentially what happens, we have historically budgeted the number of pay periods in a particular year instead of the number of days worked, and that creates an issue every so often when you have a 53rd pay period in a year, and it causes a spiking in the operating budget. Most organizations now budget for days worked rather than pay periods. And so there's a one-time cost to migrate from one accounting system to another. And the cost of that conversion this year was close to $800,000. And we were planning to do that through a combination of one-time revenues, overlay reserve, and free cash. But we had to abandon that earlier this year. But that was one of our goals. Moving our OPEB contribution out of free cash and into the general fund was a second goal. Moving some of our capital expenditure, which we make each year and pay for from free cash, into the tax levy was another goal. There's been a deficiency the last couple of years, probably 3 years, in our benefits and insurance budget. The last time that we made changes to the health plan, we anticipated enrollment was going to go down. It actually went up, and so we've been chasing deficiency in that budget for a couple of years. So we thought this was a year where we'd be able to correct that. And then not necessarily dollar and cents related, but we were also preparing to develop a budget document that would allow us to pursue the GFOA budget award. The town has received the certificate for excellence in financial reporting the last 15 years for our annual audit, which is given to communities who exhibit full transparency with the way that they budget and account for their expenses. And so we wanted to put some effort into the budget document this year. And we've implemented some of those changes, but some of them are on the shelf now until staff is back in the building and we have a chance to start over again on that. And by Christmas time, we were on track to achieve a number of these goals, due primarily to savings and cost avoidance on our healthcare plan, which was a 1.5 year long process, working with our unions to do that, and also some savings on the Smith School project with our first round of debt issuance, based on both our upgrade to AAA and the timing of that debt. It created some relief in the 21 budget. By February this year, we were forced to address two unanticipated hits to the budget process. The first was a mid-year increase in our out-of-district special ed costs. Lisa and Keith may be able to speak to that during the school budget, but essentially, when children either move into our school district with an IEP or receive an IEP during the year, if those kids if there are out-of-district programs that benefit those kids that we send them to, the tuition cost is something that we have to pick up and that can range anywhere from $20,000 to close to $250,000 a year, depending on the placement. So we had 10 new placements this year that were not anticipated as part of the budget last year. That created about $1.5 million new expense. And we're really going to have to tackle that in three pieces. We're going to be proposing a budget transfer at this year's town meeting to close fiscal 20. Roughly, I believe at this point, it's about a $400,000 increase in the school budget next year to start to offset that cost. And then we'll also be using our circuit breaker revenue to offset that cost. But that was a shock that we were not anticipating before the holidays, and quickly had to switch gears and prepare for in January and February. And then the second shock was the Essex Tech assessment this year, which is increasing a little bit under $600,000. I believe $578,000 is the number, which represents about a 23% increase over last year's assessment, and at this point represents about 25% of the new spending next year in our operating budget. So that those combined about $1 million in expense that needed to be accounted for in the budget. So again, we weren't able to meet all those goals, but despite these issues, we were able to present the budget in March with several of our goals accomplished. One of which was implementing the split payroll conversion. We had been able to shift all of our general fund supported OPEB contribution out of free cash and into the tax levy, and we had corrected, we believe, the deficiency in the benefits budget. In March, the budget that we had put together for the selectmen's review on March 14th represented about a 3.9% increase over FY20, which was roughly $4 million in new revenue and new expenditure, including some of the strongest numbers we had seen in some time in some of our local receipts, room tax, meals tax, motor vehicle. We're seeing an increase we're expecting our third or fourth consecutive year of increase in state aid, as well as an increase in our pilot. Unfortunately, as we all know, in early March, COVID-19 swept across the Commonwealth. The governor issued an emergency declaration. We did the same. And as you can imagine, the revenue projections have sort of fallen off the cliff in some key areas. We've dropped our revenue projections and consequently our projected expenditures since then by a little bit under $2 million. So essentially half of the proposed spending in next year's budget has been either deferred or eliminated in response to what we're expecting to see on the revenue side. At this point, we have been and continue to be in almost daily communication with our municipal peers, with our state delegation, the Mass Municipal Association, the Metro Area Planning Council, Governor's Office, the Division of Local Services, or some combination of those. And the reductions that we have made, the board reviewed last week and supported, are based on the best information we have from our partners, those I just mentioned, as well as our experience during the Great Recession and the latest available guidance that we've had from the state. I was on a call this morning with the North Shore Chamber of Commerce, and several members of the North Shore delegation indicated that we should all be expecting a drop of some sort in state aid next year. They understand that passing those cuts on to the towns really just exacerbate bad situations. They also understand that the earlier they can get us a local aid resolution, the better. I think everybody at this point is expecting less than FY20. The question is how much. So that brings us to kind of the budget that we're talking about tonight. I had been fumbling through the best way to describe it, and actually Gardner summed it up very well in our last meeting. This budget really represents somewhere in between Pollyanna and Chicken Little. We're trying. I have a lot of colleagues who have early town meetings. They've already adopted budgets for FY21. They've made the decision to just start the year with their approved budget and make adjustments as necessary in the fall. Because we have a late town meeting, we made a number of those adjustments up front, changed some of our revenue projections up front, pushed out some things that we knew we could do. We worked very closely with our unions over the past month and a half on some adjustments to salary expectations for next year. So we've taken the first couple of steps toward where we think we're going, and and again, so we're sort of in between being too optimistic about where we end up in 6 months and making severe reductions now that would either adversely impact services or cause a reduction in force. And I'd like to pause for a second and say thank you to the public schools, to the library, our unions, and our non-union employees, because the fact that we're even able to talk about a balanced budget right now, with some pretty serious reductions in some key revenue lines, which we'll go through shortly, is a testament to the collaboration of this shared sacrifice across each of the major functions in town. And as I did last week for the selectmen, I would particularly like to thank and acknowledge the work that the presidents of our unions did over the past year and a half, working collaboratively with us on the health plan redesign that we completed late last year and that the board reviewed in October and then again in December. If not for the proactive changes that were made to that health plan starting a year and a half ago, we'd be in a very different situation today. And so I think it's worth acknowledging that. And I think before I switch to revenue, I'll just note this budget. We're usually pretty proud of the fact that we can end the year within 1% or 2% of where we start the year. This is likely not going to be one of those years, but we feel like the adjustments that have been made to the preliminary budget are going to position us very well in the fall, in the event that the bottom continues to fall out of some of the revenue lines that we're going to talk about, and additional adjustments need to be made. So I think, unless there are questions about any of the overview I just provided, I'd like to switch over and talk about some of our key revenue categories, which are laid out in the cover letter to the budget message that was provided to you late last week. Since you're all muted, you can't be shouting, so I'm also not seeing any waving hands. I'm gonna walk through some of the key revenue lines and then pause there to see if there are questions about the revenues. So I'll start with the revenue categories where we're expecting to see volatility next year. First, as I had already mentioned, state aid. That represents about 10% of our budget. We're just north of $10 million in state aid. We've, as I've mentioned, we've been in pretty close communication with our delegation. I've been on text and email and phone calls with a lot of my colleagues in the region. A lot of calls with the board of directors from the MMA, and what we've included in this revised budget. We had been anticipating a little bit less than a 3% increase in state aid this year based on state revenues mid-year. That's been reversed. We're now anticipating a 15% reduction in UGA, or the general government aid, and a more modest 5% reduction in Chapter 70. Everybody knows that the legislature passed pretty sweeping education and finance reform this year, the Student Opportunities Act. I believe the speaker just this week was on record saying that that the House is going to do everything it can to salvage as much of that legislation as it can. Historically, the Chapter 70 tends to be impacted a little bit less than the general government side. So the blended impact of those two reductions is a little bit less than 8%. So close to a 10-point swing from a 2% plus increase to a 7.7% decrease. And so that's the first major category we're expecting to see some lost ground next year. The other ones are in our local receipt categories. Obviously, the room tax, we're expecting the fourth quarter collection for FY20, the year that we're in, to be decimated. We receive those revenues in a delayed fashion, so it won't be until later this year that we receive our fourth quarter for 20. We know that we're going to receive it, but there probably won't be much of it. We have budgeted a 20% reduction from our FY19 actual, so not from our FY20 budget number, but from our last full year of actual. As you all know, we budget fairly conservatively in these local receipt lines. It's important, based on the budgeting process and practices that we've used for a long time, that we do that, because the revenue that is collected above the budgeted target is what leads to our free cash numbers the following year, which is what allows us to pay for capital, put aside funds into our OPEB trust, build our reserves, and maintain the fiscal discipline that that we're accustomed to. So the good news is when you're conservative, the cliff isn't as tall in the first budget. This will really the ripple effect here will be in the free cash certification that comes at the end of this year and the following year. But again, we're including a 20% reduction in the room tax. Similarly, we're expecting a 20% reduction in the meals tax. Again, that's based off of our FY19 actual. A slightly less severe drop in motor vehicle excise because that gets collected. There may be some delinquencies, but those get collected. The slippage there is most likely will be the result of rather than buying a new car in the coming year, a lot of folks may buy a used car or an off-lease car, and that does have an impact on the motor vehicle excise that is assessed by the state and collected by the town. And then permitting is the other category where we've dropped our assumptions going into next year. Interestingly, we all remember back in February we passed some pretty sweeping changes to our zoning in the downtown. I've been speaking to Rich Maloney and David Fields from Planning and Code, and there remains quite a bit of interest. They've had a number of meetings in platforms just like this of either existing businesses that would like to expand in the downtown or interested parties who have been studying the zoning and are asking questions about what they can do. And some of our large projects have continued unabated in Cherry Hill and elsewhere. So we're bracing for a drop, but inspectional services is as busy as they've ever been. And the question will be the magnitude of some of these projects. And it's worth noting, the new growth projection for the year is unchanged. And the reason for that is that even throughout the Great Recession, we never saw new growth in Danvers dip below $600,000. So we've left that alone. That's an area obviously that could be adjusted in the fall if things turn out to be worse than projected. But that's not an area that we've made adjustment, although on the permitting side we did. I think the other key revenue highlights that I would just touch on quickly. There's an increase, so the net result in our local receipts is actually a little bit less than a 1% increase. And as Dan noted in his letter, as the chair noted in his letter to the Finance Committee, we had been budgeting north of a 6% increase this year in our local receipts. And as I mentioned, that was based on we were at some all-time highs in some of these categories. So we're going from about a 6.5% increase to just under a 1% increase in local receipts. What's driving the increase this year is two things. One, this is the first full year when our host agreement with Sanctuary Medicinal, which is the medical marijuana facility in Danvers Industrial Park, is going to be paid. That's $150,000, which is included in the local receipts line. And then the second is the first year of a 4-year phase-in of an update to the pilot payment made by the electric department, which was last adjusted in 1995. So there are two increases in the local receipts line, which partly offset the reductions that I just mentioned. The property tax levy is where it normally is. And as I mentioned, the new growth number at this point remains unchanged because based on past practice and past history, we're not anticipating a drop there yet. I think I'll stop there in terms of the revenue overview. Rodney and I would be happy to take any detailed questions you have on some of the revenue assumptions. And then if there are no questions or once we've answered those, I would turn it back to the chair to get into some of the operating budget presentations.
Thank you, Steve. I'll just quickly go down the line. Paul Pollock, do you have any questions? Gina, any questions, Gina?
Are we just talking about revenue in general right now?
Yes.
Well, will we be getting into the specific line items? I did look through the budget and have some questions about a few different specific things. Are we getting into that later?
Yes. We'll go into each budget like we normally would.
Okay, no questions yet.
And I suggest
Okay, great.
if the questions are related to revenue specifically, I think we'd be happy to address those, and then go into the operating expenditure side. But I also defer to you if you'd like to save all the questions until later.
No, I think that's a good plan. Mike Landers, do you have any questions right now?
Hold on, Mike, I'm gonna mute you. Hold on a second, Mike. This is a long list of names. There we go.
It's sort of just a generalized question that I have with that, which is there any possibility that because we've been proactive and we've tried to reduce our budget, that we could be penalized by the state when they start to figure out what they're going to give people? You know, of other communities which basically, as you said, just kept their budget as they had it, moved forward like they weren't going to, we weren't in a problem. And then now when the state begins to make decisions about how that aid is going to be given out, are we going to be at a disadvantage because we've done the right thing?
I believe the answer would be no for two reasons. Rodney has been digesting all of the information related to the CARES Act, which speaks to some of the revenue that will be coming federally. But it's very specific that the funds cannot be used to cover lost revenue. It's only to cover additional costs related to your response to COVID-19. And secondarily, if the state is going to do any sort of stimulus for towns and cities, they would be providing it through the formulas that they already use for a number of their revenue categories. So I don't have that concern that we would somehow be penalized later because we started working on changes to our health plan 2 years ago.
Thanks.
It sounds like Paul was trying to speak, CR, so I might unmute him for a second.
Sure,
Did
go
you have
ahead.
a question, Mike, or is that it?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Paul, you should be unmuted now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, that solves the problem. All right, excellent. I did have a question for you, Steve, and it relates to the assessment from Essex Tech, which you said was $578,000. And I know we'll hear from Essex Tech later, but I did listen to the presentation before when they talked to the Board of Selectmen. Now, they mentioned that they were down in enrollment from 69, I think, in the incoming class to 49, the freshman class. Would that affect the amount of the assessment?
Not this year. So the freshman class, the admissions decisions in April of 2019 are what impact the fiscal year 21 budget. So the admissions decisions that were made this spring will affect the FY22 budget and so forth.
Okay.
And I think Dr. Riccio will be able to talk to that when she makes her presentation in terms of those numbers were close but not quite accurate, but they did drop from last year to this year.
Yeah, they did. And I just wondered whether it would affect us immediately.
Not this.
Obviously not. Okay, that was the only question I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Sally Kearns.
Hold on, Sally. Here we go. You're unmuted.
Thank you. I'm sure that you're doing this, but I have to ask because the Chapter 70 prediction of 5% reduction seems a little bit optimistic. So are you crafting scenario 1, is it 5% reduction, scenario 2 is a 10% reduction as you contemplate?
So we're doing some scenario building, not based on any particular revenue line, but based more broadly on the budget itself. And this came up a little bit on the selectmen's meeting. There's never a good time for a global pandemic to shut down an economy, but having it happen toward the end of one fiscal year leading into the next is, from a budgetary perspective, is probably the best. Because the budget that we set in June this year, we will be digesting information. We'll have some state aid numbers in early July. We'll have a couple more months of economic data to look at. And so by August and September, if it's evident that some of these assumptions were off, we'll have 3/4 of our fiscal year to make the corrections that are needed. And we do have a list of areas that we know we can look at if things get worse.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Michael Daly.
Just generally following up on Sally, but I won't get too specific. Are there any other plans for any reduction in forces, personnel, services, something else? Because it looks like in the fall or in the second or third quarter next year, we're going to be in a lot of trouble unless there's additional reductions, or you're going to have to do a heck of a job on the tax levies.
I can start to speak. I think that's an operating side question. I can speak to that sort of generally, Mike. And I think my first goal, my primary goal since March has been to make sure that employees are healthy and safe and employed, and that the public is safe. And we have not had to reduce headcount yet, in part because by the time the economy went south, we had collected 90% of the revenue for FY20 that we were going to. We've also spent the last month and a half working with each of our bargaining units on one-year agreements in light of what's happening. And so when we talk about $1.9 million in revenue and expenditure reductions from where we were 2 months ago, a significant portion of that came from our bargaining units sacrificing and acknowledging this issue. So we've been able to put a budget together that at least starts the year with some sense. But they know, like and like everybody knows, that 75 cents of every dollar we spend in our budget is on people. So if in the fall things are worse than they are today, there will be some very difficult decisions that have to be made, and that could include furloughs, that could include defunding vacant positions. We do have, this also came up in the selectmen's meeting, we have a number of vacancies right now that currently all hiring has been frozen unless I greenlight the average for a position. We do have some that we're going to have to fill. Some of those vacancies are in police and fire, so we can't very well maintain those. But I think sort of generally, in response to your question, I think if things go from bad today to worse later, we'll have some really hard decisions we have to make. But thankfully we're not there yet. And in part, that's because everybody has stepped up to try to put a budget together that can get us started on the right foot in FY21.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Sally Calhoun.
One second, I will unmute. Go ahead, Sally.
Thank you. So the revenue and expenditure detail history that you've shared with us shows that the total revenue for fiscal 2020 was 121,461. And yet we're not quite done with fiscal 2020. It goes through June 30. And it's been this last quarter of the fiscal year that things have just ground to a halt for stuff like the motels and the hotels in particular. So for the hotels, motels, restaurants, and the tax that they pay to the town, for the months of, March, April, May, June. When do those receipts come in, Steve?
I'm gonna unmute Rodney, and he can talk. I think you're talking about the tax recap column in the budget, so I'd like to let you to
Yes.
that, your question about the timing. Just hold on one second, Rodney.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. So for the recap number, the 121,461, that is the budgeted number for FY20. That wouldn't be a year-to-date number. That's what we budgeted for FY20. In terms of the meals and hotel, so they're generated over 3-month increments, then paid to the state, then there's a month or two lag time before they're turned over to us. So our fourth quarter, we would receive on June 30th, but it'd be for revenue collected around February, March, and April. So that's why we talk about that the hit to hotel and meals is really going to hit us a little bit in the tail end of FY20 and then linger on into FY21 in that third quarter. Yeah.
Plus, as the town manager just said a moment ago, that by March, the town had collected 90% of the revenue of fiscal 20. So from what you just said, Rodney, we won't really feel the impact of the decimation, really, of the business for hotels, motels, restaurants till probably the beginning of fiscal 21 and a couple months into that, right?
I would say overall revenues have been strong, but yeah, on those, it would be more in FY21, but we're still about, from what we've collected year to date to what we need to collect to meet our targets, we're about 450,000 short on meals and hotels for FY20.
Oh.
That's so, yeah, so I mean, we should collect something, but again, that would be an area where we're a little concerned, but again, we should collect some revenue. A lot of it will depend on A, how much was generated while we were still open, and B, even the taxes that were generated if they turn around and paid to the state and then dispersed to us.
So one of my questions is, as you project revenue for fiscal 21, there really hasn't, you're not projecting a decrease, or not much of a decrease in those line items. For hotel motel, it's just $200,000 less, and the same with meals. It just seems to me likely that those two sources of revenue are going to be much smaller than that.
So I think that's why what the manager touched on was we were budgeting decreases based on our actual. So we historically are very conservative with what we budget for our hotel and meals. So if you look at it, 20 versus 21, the drop isn't as significant if you look at what the 19 actual is versus 21. So we dropped them both by 20%, so a little under a quarter. So we're assuming that we lose a little under a quarter of the revenue we normally collect.
Now, the other item in revenue that I was wondering about is the free cash. It shows it bumping up. And Steve, you may have given the reasons for that and I missed it, but why are you projecting almost $180,000 increase anyway in the free cash item?
So that number is a little bit misleading. Our free cash certification this year was 5.6 million, Rodney, is that correct?
Correct.
So that's the portion of our $5.6 million free cash certification that would be used in support of our capital outlay. And the reason that it's higher than last year is we're not actually spending more on capital this year, but one of the actions that Rodney took with DPW last year was to go back and look at all of the warrant balances that had been approved over the years and identify either project savings or projects that were never done and were rendered, determined to be unnecessary. And we swept a lot of those accounts last year to complete our capital work. So we still spent, we averaged north of, you can see in the columns, 2 years ago, we spent close to $1 million on our capital. So we're actually down from where we have been, although it looks in the budget like it's an increase, and that's because we were using other financing sources for some of that work last year. But that's a small portion of the total free cash number.
Excuse me. Steve, can you tell us what kinds of agreements you've reached with the unions? Is that something you can describe to us, or is that ongoing negotiations that you can't discuss?
I can speak generally to that. So we most of the agreements the majority have now been ratified by the unions, and all but one we have a tentative agreement in place. So for about 97% of our employees, we have agreements in place for next year, and the adjustments range from 0, so no COLA adjustment at all, up to 1.5%. So for our public safety employees, it'll be a 1.5% increase from where they were. A lot of the general government employees, including myself and the department heads, will take a zero next year. We're softening the blow of that by realigning our hours to the public. So we've known for about 3 or 4 years now that the open hours for the buildings in Danvers are much higher than they are in some of the surrounding communities. 35 to 36 hours has become pretty much the norm. We were still at 44 hours to the public and 40 hours for most employees. Peabody, for example, works a 32-hour week. So we're realigning that on July 1st. It's something we discussed last week. But collectively, including the teachers and public safety and all of the general government, a little bit less than $350,000 in the savings that we're talking about from the budget in March is attributable to the agreements that our employees said yes to. And so I think that's what we're speaking about.
Okay. I just kind of one final comment is, again, facing this, what feels today, to me anyway, like this yawning gap in front of us. It just seems that our budget, of course, is based on what we project the revenue is going to be. First, you kind of figure out how much you're going to have, and then you decide how to spend it. And for fiscal 21, you're projecting revenue that's higher than it was for fiscal 20. And that concerns me, alarms me, because I just don't see that we're going to have the same revenue or higher revenue than we had for fiscal 20 in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing impact it's going to have on almost every line of revenue. I'm just concerned about that. We're kind of beginning with a number that I question.
Sally, we share that, I guess, to the extent, we share that concern. I think that's, I started to say at the beginning of the presentation, we were projecting about a $4 million increase in the budget this year. That's been cut in half. And one quarter of that increase is our assessment to Essex Tech. So, our spending is going up by a little north of $2 million next year as proposed. 578,000 of that is the increase in that assessment, and almost 25% is the actuarially determined contribution to PIRAC for the retirement cost. So 50% of the proposed new spending next year is going to PIRAC and to Essex Tech. So outside of those two items, the budget itself is going up by less than 1%. And I would note that, the reason the revenue is increasing and not decreasing is that, for better or worse, Danvers, like all communities in Massachusetts, relies on the property tax, which is our most stable tax base. The vast majority of property taxes are paid by mortgage companies. Ronnie got into a little bit of detail on this on the last call. One of the differences now from 10 years ago is that banks seem to have realized that allowing property taxes to fall into arrears is bad for their bottom line, because the town or the city is generally the first lien holder. And so they can either cover the tax costs themselves, or they then also pay the statutory, the 14% as determined by the state. So, revenue is up because the property tax is projected to be stable, in large part because it has always been stable. But you're right, we do have some key revenue accounts that are down and could be down more than they are right now. And I think the message that I would deliver is that, we've tried to reduce expenditure everywhere we can going into the year, so that if things are worse, we're halfway toward where we need to be. And if by September things are bad, then we'll have the remaining 3 quarters of the year to make adjustments as needed.
Well, I mean, just thinking, for instance, about the real estate taxes. As you say, for a lot of people, that's something that's paid by their mortgage holder. But there's a lot of people that pay it on their own, of course. And the governor's emergency orders have included pushing out the date for real estate taxes to be paid to June 1. So even now, we can't have a solid feel for whether that revenue source is going to decrease significantly. We won't know that till, June. And our fiscal year starts July 1. I personally feel that as a town, I would like us to try to keep our programming and our employees, everybody as busy and for as long as we can. I'm just concerned about the hit that's going to be ahead. I mean, I can't even say that it could be ahead. I just feel that it's inevitable. But I have been, kind of isolated in my house, and my imagination goes in dark places. But it just concerns me.
Well, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but I would make one final comment there, and that, as we were working with our bargaining units this spring, they asked questions about layoffs and things like that, and they understand that that's a possibility. My view is that I would like to hold that off for as long as possible, because once you do that, it's hard to undo it. And I think that's the ultimate, in terms of, we're an organization that provides services, and it's people who provide those services. And we want to position ourselves to be ready to respond if things get worse. But to use Gardner's analogy from the beginning of the call, we don't want to go into fiscal year 21 being either Pollyanna or Chicken Little. We want to be somewhere in the middle and ready to react, as additional information becomes available to us.
Gotcha. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Rodney. That's it for me.
Thank you, Sally. Ted Blake.
I just have one quick question, Steve, and if it's better addressed later in the presentations, that's fine. Have you had any discussions with the rating agencies about how this may affect our rating, or more generally how they're going to view like COVID-related budget shortfalls in their ratings assessments?
So I don't know if Rodney wants to speak to that. I do know that I believe S&P and probably Moody's issued general negative outlooks for everybody in the Commonwealth. So regardless of whether you were a AAA or a junk bond, they put everybody on notice. I suspect they probably did the same thing in most states. I think in terms of what the rating agencies are going to be looking at, it'll depend, I guess. They'll want to see what kinds of decisions you're making, what sort of rationale you have for the decisions you're making. Did you make adjustments in real time, or did you pretend that nothing was happening? So I think we've taken the steps that we need to take. We've issued the memorandums to departments, and so I think we've positioned ourselves to show that we're taking the necessary actions. If we end up losing our hard-earned bond rating next year, I think it's going to be it'll be attributable to the broader economic downturn that's coming, and not necessarily any action or inaction locally. But Rodney, I don't know if you want to add to any of that, but I think generally speaking,
Yeah, that makes pretty much sense. It'll be more of a general overall economy that drives everyone down.
Yeah.
In reality, in a town like Danvers, it's an opportunity for us to prove our worth as a AAA community with how we react
Right.
in the coming months. So I think it actually could be an opportunity for us.
And what's our financing profile looking like in the next couple of years? I know we did the financing in August. Do we need to go back to the well soon for the school construction?
So we'll have another piece of the Smith School probably next August. We'll probably go for not this coming August, but the following year. Other than that, we do have some water and sewer projects ongoing, but other than that, that's the only big bond offering, I think, on the immediate horizon.
Okay. That's it for me, guys.
Thank you, Ted. We do have one question from the watching public. I believe it's been answered satisfactorily, but I will ask the question still. This is from town meeting member Matthew Duggan. Many companies are currently furloughing employees to reduce staffing costs. If state aid is significantly reduced in the coming months, will the town consider temporarily reducing employee hours or other salary cutbacks to prevent the need to institute layoffs? This is relevant considering employees consume upwards of 75% of the annual budget. And I believe that's been addressed a number of times, certainly to my satisfaction So I think we can move on, but thank you for the question. And we certainly do appreciate those of you who are watching, and we welcome your questions and your feedback during the meeting this evening. Given that, I think it's time to move into some of our operational budgets. And first on the agenda is our library director, Alex Lent. So I will give the floor over to Alex. We look forward to hearing your presentation this evening, Alex. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for having me. It's always a treat to meet with you and discuss the library. I particularly appreciate it this year. It's been a while since I've talked to anyone new, so I guess we can talk about the library. I'll talk about just about anything with you. But let's stick to the library. The library's done some good work this year, and we continue to do good work now. Among our accomplishments so far this year are reconfiguring the main lobby into a larger, more open public space that's easier to manage and navigate and which better serves the public. Establishing the Community and Outreach Services Department, which significantly increases the library's ability to engage with the community, provide library services beyond 15 Sylvan Street, and find new ways to serve residents. We've also launched the Pop-Up Library of Danvers and received a grant from the Pillsbury Foundation to support its services to Danvers' senior population. And we've significantly expanded the e-library with new content and greater support. So these were important and impactful accomplishments before the pandemic. They're vital now, and they will be absolutely critical in the months to come. We have a few goals for FY 2021. The first of which is to maintain staffing levels and emphasize staff training in order to provide excellent service both in person and remotely, increasingly remotely. To expand the e-library from a collection of resources that provide downloadable and streamable content into a full-service branch of the library with collections, services, and events similar to those that you might find at 15 Sylvan Street. Reconfigure library spaces and adjust procedures and policies to accommodate changing needs. Expand, improve, and advertise our job search and career support services, and to safely provide excellent library service to the Danvers community. These goals lead to our proposed budget for FY 2021. So before the pandemic, we were already looking at a fairly flat budget, and we're coming in at a 1.88% budget right now. We're seeing a real, if slight, decrease in our temporary positions line compared to the current fiscal year. These come from small staffing adjustments of various types. So when we budgeted for being open on Friday mornings, we anticipated at least some of our Friday morning hours going to staff members who had maxed out their grades. But the way it worked out, no staff members who had maxed out their grades were interested in taking on additional hours on Friday mornings. So because of this, Friday mornings ended up costing us slightly less than we had anticipated. Multiple staff members who have maxed out their grades have voluntarily reduced their hours. When this happens, we reassign those hours to staff members who are at the same step or lower, because there aren't any at a higher step, and this either maintains or lowers our costs. And then several staff members who have maxed out their grades have resigned or retired this fiscal year, and when we rehire these positions, we tend to hire people at step one, so that saves us some money there. So we're coming in at a 0.92% increase to our salaries budget. Moving to our operating budget, we've decreased some lines where we can, but we are requesting an increase to our supplies lines and to our library materials lines. So as mentioned in previous budget presentations, we've historically used a significant portion of our state aid and trust money on collections and supplies, which is fine, but it limits our ability to use these funds for professional development, events and programming, special projects, and other more strategic items. Over the past couple years, we have increased our supplies budget and our collections budget in order to free up state aid and trust money for these strategic purposes. And our primary goal this year is to get our supplies budget all the way to $20,000. That's the amount of money we typically spend on supplies each year between town money, state aid, and trust money. So $8,000 is 0.5% of our budget, which is about 1.4% of the town's total budget. So it's not a ton of money, but it's an impactful amount of money. And if we can accomplish this, we'll be able to increase our strategic budget, which will be very important as we make adjustments for the new normal. Oh, there's sun right on me. Can anyone see me? Is that better? We're also requesting an increase to our collections budget. Libraries are about much more than collections, but collections are still the most tangible way we interact with most residents. So use of our collections has increased fairly dramatically over the past 2 years. This is partly because of policy changes, partly because we're focusing our collections investments on high demand areas, and partly because we've increased our collection spending. We want to continue to grow our collections budget so we can continue to improve our collection service. Our total budget request comes to $1,499,029, which is an increase of just shy of $28,000 or 1.88% over the current fiscal year. In economic downturns, library use increases. We see this pattern going back to World War II, and during the Great Recession, use of the Peabody Institute Library of Danvers increased by over 12%. So strategically, this is a time to maintain and protect library services. This budget allows us to continue to provide good service and with careful leadership, make necessary changes in order to provide these services safely for the staff and public. I'm happy to take questions, but that's all I've got, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alex. So we'll start with Ted Blake.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I do not have any questions. Great job. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Sally Calhoun.
Mr. Leonard, what plans do you guys have for safely reopening the library?
That's a great question. So we're still in the midst of that, but we have a multi-phase plan that's going to be launched soon. It starts with getting the staff back in the building and reconfiguring the building, accepting and quarantining returned materials, and then introducing most likely curbside pickup for a period of time. And then we'll slowly introduce people or reintroduce people back to the building, and over time expand the area of the building that's available, expand the services that are available, expand our hours until we're back up to normal operations or new normal operations.
Will you, like, is there a concern about, like, if I wanted to borrow a book and I did a curbside pickup, is there any concern about contamination of that book? You know what I'm saying? Will you have to do anything to clean the books or something?
So there's a study going on right now about how long COVID-19 can last on surfaces, including books. And we're waiting for the details of that. But our best practice right now is to quarantine materials for a given amount of time. So we're thinking about how to accept materials back from the public, because we have about 10,000 items in circulation right now. And likely the easiest thing to do is to put them in a bin in the library and isolate them for a week or 2 weeks until we can be reasonably sure that they're safe. The library building itself has been sealed for quite a while and it's been sanitized multiple times by DPW. So we can be reasonably sure that inside the building, the current collections that are housed there are safe.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think it's an important time to keep the library fully functioning as well as we can. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Michael Daly.
Yes, I don't have any problems. The question I had was the repairs being made. Was that all taken care of in the archival center of the flooding that happened there?
So there were two projects. We replaced the fire suppression system in the archive to a waterless system, and that is complete, and the archives are doing fine. Then we had a fortunately unrelated sprinkler issue in our main lobby, and that has been repaired.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Sally Kearns.
I have no questions. I just want to applaud the library. Thank you for all you're doing. And I can tell that you were very thoughtful about your budget this year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Mike Landers.
Nothing to add in regards to that. Again, they do a great job and it's a tremendous asset to the community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Gina McCusker.
Just a question on the children's programming this summer. I know that there's usually lots of events that come in. are any of those events being delayed with the slow reopening and phase? I guess I'm wondering, can any of those funds be pushed to later in the year?
Yeah, so our programming budget is entirely state aid and trust money, so that's very flexible. We're still working on our programming plans. Likely programming will be one of the last things to come back, just because it's by definition a bunch of people in a room. But yeah, we're looking at pushing those back and finding new ways to do programming.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Gina. Paul Pollock? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I had two questions regarding the office supplies and materials, but you answered those, and I want to thank you for the services you provide to the town. Very well prepared budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. My only question, Alex, is, and I do applaud everything you're doing, and keep up the good work. Library is one of my favorite places for sure. I'm just curious about the balances of the George Peabody Trust and the George Peabody Society Trust. And can you just remind us how you augment the budget every year with those two trusts?
Absolutely. So we're a little, I don't have the report right in front of me, but our trust is surprisingly stable considering what's going on with the economy. I believe between the two trusts, we have about $550,000 in there. Typically between state aid and trust money, we dedicate $50,000 to our operating budget. And in recent years, that's been supplies and collections primarily. We've been trying to move more of that into professional development, special projects, things like that. So we still maintain the same amount of money, but it's in different things now. So we've also changed the balance of it from being almost entirely trust money to almost entirely state aid, because the less we use the trust, the more it can grow on itself. So we tend to use all of our state aid every year for operations. So we look at about $36,000 in state aid, and we are not sure what we're going to get next year in state aid, but between the two sources, we'll dedicate about $50,000.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you. All right. I would ask that Jen Breaker, who is hosting our meeting now, unmute all of us so that we can hear hopefully not feedback. But is there a motion?
I move the budget.
Sally Calhoun moves the budget. Is there a second?
Second.
Mike Landers seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Budget passes. Thank you. Okay. We're now going to move on to the Essex Technical High School. I invite Heidi Riccio to come to the floor, so to speak. Of course, we don't vote tonight on the tech's budget. We'll do that under a warrant article next week, but we are glad to welcome Heidi as well as her business manager, Marie Zamorowski, and our representative to the tech, Wayne Markey. So Heidi, welcome, and take it away, please.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this evening, and I welcome your feedback. As you know, much like the town of Danvers, as well as other municipalities across the Commonwealth, our school was also faced with some uncertainties related to a budget that had already been approved by our 20-member school committee in March. With that, there are still some unsureties. This morning, I heard Senator Tarr say 6%. In the newspaper, I see an $8 billion deficit. This morning, it was a $6 billion deficit. So obviously, even our own state representatives and senators are kind of unsure of what that will look like. As a result, when I presented last week to you, I did kind of clearly state that without having an approved revised school committee budget, not knowing exactly where we are at with what the state figures are, as well as our Student Opportunity Act, I can only present to you what our existing budget is and offer 2 additional Plan B and Plan C. Much like Steve Bartha and I'm sure Lisa Dana, we closely worked with our unions. We have an AFSME unit, which consists of custodial, maintenance, transportation, clerical, and we're in negotiations right now to include our paraprofessionals into that unit. In addition, our AFT or HFT, the Hawthorne Federation of Teachers Union, to come up with creative ways. We have met several times to discuss creative ways of avoiding staff reductions. We do have approximately 100 additional students that are coming to Essex North Shore Agricultural and Technical School from the year prior as part of our maximum capacity enrollment, which is something that Governor Baker as well as Commissioner Riley expects of vocational schools in the Commonwealth, is to seek maximum enrollment in all of our career and technical education programs, in addition to partnership programs that we have with 4 of our municipalities, including Beverly, Peabody, Salem, and Gloucester. And we have signed memorandum of understandings for those communities that are funded through private organizations and foundations, but small fees in addition to whatever they get over and above their Chapter 70 funding as it relates to Chapter 74. So our original, as you can see in our budget document that was sent to you, we started out the budget process in November and worked right through until March, reducing either positions, reducing major projects that we had on the docket, particularly on the South Campus of our school. The South Campus is the older building campus that housed Essex Agricultural School prior to the new opening. We did end up with a 4.84% increase over the year prior, looking at the majority of that increase as a direct result to our negotiating a teacher's contract and what column movements and increase in pay scales meant for that. What we looked at in our plan B and C is a reduction in a couple different ways, and we are waiting to get final feedback from our unions. But Plan B includes a furlough of 3 days across the board for next school year, and that furlough would net us $267,000 that would go directly to our budget. The second part of Plan B is a staffing reduction. So looking at possible staffing reductions that would net approximately $400,000 that would go towards our budget deficit if and when the governor comes out with their revised state budget. We had also done a hiring freeze, much like Steve had mentioned, for the town of Danvers, and that includes more of a systems, but it was an IT specialist, a horticultural specialist, 2 of our maintenance facilities that were voluntarily laid off. We will not be calling them back, as well as an English language arts teacher. We did decrease our materials of approximately $100,000. I would like to keep in mind that $100,000, we had already reduced our supply account significantly during our budget season from January until March to really come at that. So reducing it any further than $100,000 would actually decrease services, direct services to our students. The second plan, which is considered Plan C, for lack of a better word, but we are working with the unions as well as our administrative unit. Our administrative unit has agreed to do a pay freeze if that is necessary based on the budget, which would net approximately $50,000. The remaining pay freeze would net about $430,000, and that would be step column moves, a migration that was negotiated through our contract and that's for both the teachers union as well as AFSCME, and then the sick buyback. We would also, again, that position reduction would net about $400,000. Those positions are still under discussion, so I can't necessarily give you what those positions are at this time, but that is the figure that we are looking at reducing. Again, the hiring freeze, which is about $229,000, the materials at 102. What items are not determined yet, because we believe that these are kind of worst case scenarios, as is Plan B and Plan C, is summer staff furloughs, as well as additional day reduction. So often in a school district or a school system, guidance counselors and nurses have extra days that are attached to the teachers unit. So it may be 4 additional days per guidance counselor. They actually help with the scheduling in the summertime and any other services, including special education transition for our special educators and 504 plans. And so those reductions would net us an additional $20,000. If you look at your assessment, I understand that that's certainly a concern, which I can empathize with. The assessment per pupil has increased by 1.6%. So while our overall budget increased to 4.84%, the increase based on our revenues that we have taken in has only increased 1.6%. We are currently at minimum contribution from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. School districts do not go below minimum contribution because that could have negative impacts to future budgets. Basically, we are presenting a budget that is at minimum contribution for all of our sending communities, the 17 sending communities, which means we are basically charging an assessment that is equal to what the state is telling us that we should either be charging or obviously receiving. Your assessment increase is a direct result of enrollment assessment. So students, we definitely have had an incline in the number of students that have not only applied to Essex North Shore Agricultural and Technical School, but that have also, we have offered acceptances to. So for example, and what we were talking, I think the question came earlier, we have 67 grade 9 students from Danvers, Massachusetts. We have 37 seniors that are graduating, and we currently have 49 incoming, meaning 8th grade students who reside in the town of Danvers, Massachusetts, that have directly stated that they will be coming to us in September. So I think if you look through the budget, certainly our budget is fair. Again, it is a direct result of what our enrollment is. I know that Steve did present a letter to our school committee, which we have formed a subcommittee in enrollment so that you can really kind of know what that enrollment level is. And we are definitely working on that as a subcommittee. We did have one meeting to date, and we'll be having future meetings obviously as well, so that we can come up with some sort of standardized enrollment path for Danvers, for expecting what those figures will be. I'm sure you had time to kind of process the budget, but I will say that we're very successful when it comes to competitive grant funding. We are also successful when it comes to revenues. We were able to, your assessment increase of 1.6% was able to be accomplished because the Student Opportunity Act, we received an additional $600,000 from the state. We're not quite sure where that is going to be, but that $600,000 did not go into our budget. It was used to directly reduce assessments to all of our 17 member communities. In addition to that, last year, we began a special education assessment for our out of district or our agricultural students. So as you know, we service an additional 38 communities across 3 different counties, Essex, Middlesex, and Suffolk. And with that, those students that net probably about 309 students to date, if they are on an individual education plan, we are able to increase their assessment based on the needs. And so that has increased our revenue by $150,000, which again directly came off the assessment to each of our sending communities. We are seeking with the Commissioner Riley an additional funding source for our agricultural students. As you know, it does cost more per pupil, whether it's an agricultural student or a career and technical education student. And so we did seek an additional fee for our out-of-district students. We have not yet received approval. Those state fees just came out last week, but the request that we made to Commissioner Riley is still sitting on his desk. So we're waiting for it. However, we anticipate that too, we already pre-anticipated an increase in revenues as a result of that increase in a per pupil rate to our students. So we're certainly working hard at making sure that we reduce assessments per pupil. Again, when you look at that increase in assessment, it's not because we're not spending our money wisely. In fact, Rob Curtin at DESE says that we're not spending enough money in order to drive up what the per pupil rate is. Yet we do believe that the revenues are an important factor in keeping assessments at a reasonable amount from a per pupil perspective. In addition to that, we are, if you look in your folder, we are the lowest regional vocational school of what we spend per pupil expenditure than any other vocational and agricultural school in the Commonwealth. And we pride ourselves on the ability to actually get the competitive grants that we have been seeking, as well as the revenues that we get and take in that directly positively impact an assessment back to our sending communities. At this time, I welcome any questions that you have, certainly related to the budget that I can answer you. Marie certainly is also online, waiting with bated breath in case there are questions that, would be better come from her.
Thank you, Heidi. We'll begin with Paul Pollock.
Evening. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Paul. Yep.
Yeah, hi.
Yep.
Okay, Heidi, just to clarify a few things, the budget that I'm looking at now has not yet been revised, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so if I'm looking at, I'm looking at 2 pages, I believe, but the page I'm looking at is, I believe, proposed budget of $31,078,848. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's for 4.84 increase. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, as I watched the presentation before the Board of Selectmen, and at that point, I don't know if you said you had revised the budget, but you hadn't presented it to your school committee yet. Where are you now in that process?
Yep. So I had not revised the budget at that point because we were still in discussions. It's hard to kind of revise a budget that you really don't know where those revenues are coming from or what the state aid is. So that's where we did create a Plan B and a Plan C. So
okay,
the Plan
so
B.
Plan B and Plan C are part of proposed revisions, perhaps.
Correct. Yes. Yep.
Oh,
yeah.
all right.
Those
So-
were sent, just so that you all know, our school committee does not meet. We have a finance committee meeting the first week of June, and then a full school committee meeting the second week of June. So in order to be able to present these Plan B and Plan C to you, I did send them to our district committee in order for them to be able to see it prior to coming here this evening. But I do want to know that, or let you know that this has not been formally presented in a finance committee, as finance does not meet until the first week of June.
So when we vote to accept the budget, we will have your revisions, I assume. Or
Well,
your
again, it's
propo-
it's gonna be, I can send you the proposals for sure, absolutely send you those proposals,
Mhm.
as a revision.
I guess-
Absolutely.
I guess my question then to CR is, will we be voting on a revised budget CR, or what will we be voting on in the near future?
The warrant article, I imagine, will be written with the language that is of the current proposed budget, not any kind of revised budget, because the Essex Technical High School's school committee would not have been able to meet prior to that, prior to our warrant article review, and quite possibly prior to the writing of even the warrant for town meeting. I'm not sure about that. Steve would probably be able to answer that more technical question.
So their plan B or C, we won't have that in front of us basically yet at that point.
Right. Well,
Okay.
we'll have a
You'll have-
draft, but nothing formal, right?
Okay, all right. Well, any information would be good, I would think.
Yeah, I can definitely send these to you. I did send them to our unions. They will be talking with their members this week and early next week. And again, in draft form, but these are cuts that, the Plan B has a less of an impact than Plan C, from a financial perspective. So it really will depend on what the governor comes back as it relates to what the local aid is, as well as SOA. I mean, I did hear today that SOA, we may get some of it as opposed to none of it. Last week it was that we weren't going to get any Student Opportunity Act, so obviously there's a lot of mixed messages that are happening related, unfortunately, to our budget. And so, we're at, I think where we're at, including many other communities as well as school districts.
Okay. Let me just change a little bit, okay? A little bit of quantum leap. Well, I noticed there's some discussion, as there always seems to be, about the graduating class every year and a number of graduates that go on to college.
Yeah.
Or not. Do you have at your disposal at some point, just from a curiosity standpoint, and I've always been very impressed and encouraged by the number that do go on to college or the junior, community college, I understand that there's got to be an emphasis on the trades, which we all support too. But
Yeah.
do you have any numbers of at your disposal regarding this year's graduating class as to how many will go on to collegiate further education?
I can only give really historical data, but I can definitely also, I sent to Steve today because somebody did ask last week about what we call positive placement. So there is a document that Steve has. I don't know if he shared it with you yet, but it's 2018 graduates and kind of where they're at. And
Yes.
have they gone to college? Have they gone to the trades? Or have they gone into the military? Those are the three criteria that the federal government gives us, and what they call positive placement. So if a child goes from our school into college for the same pathway, not a different pathway, but for the same pathway, they actually get considered as a positive placement. So for example, in dental assisting, if you were to look like every year, we just started doing those senior shout outs and we have about 160 kids, and every kid in dental is either going to University of New England or Mass College of Pharmacy. And the reason being is that they have a dental hygienist program. And so those are the two colleges that they would go to, and Middlesex Community College. However, our electrical kids, because I know everybody talks about the trades, every electrical kid right now that is showcased is staying in the trade of electrical. and they will be continuing their education in our adult education electrical program. So there's a difference between, I mean, everybody has a trade, right? But there's this traditional trade pathway, which is electrical, carpentry, construction, HVAC, plumbing. Those kids are more and more staying in those trades. And I think it's because we're really encouraging that kids and parents choose those trades because they want to be in those trades. And so more and more kids are staying in the trade. Now, can I say that not like nobody's going to college? I can't say that, and nor should I, because technically we're a public school. And what, even if they go to Danvers High School, right, they might decide, you know what, I want to be in a trade. Well, I'm sure they're kicking themselves, right, because they didn't, you know, go to a vocational school, because they would have saved 3 years of their electrical apprenticeship by going to a vocational school. But that's a decision that they made at that time, and that was the right decision for them. So you can't really fault kids, but we have about a 67-33. 67% do go on to college. That is typical of a vocational school, but I think the big difference for us between any other vocational school, we have those agricultural programs that are STEM related. So, you know, if you think about vet science, you don't want the kid not to go to college if they're in vet science, because they could go to North Shore Community College, get a vet science certificate, and then go on to either Tufts University or, you know, some other school if they choose that pathway. But a vocational education gives the kids the foundation and the groundwork to make middle range skilled employment. But then that college or that addition, like, so I look at post-secondary, so that 2-year college, 4-year college, or Nighthawks program at Essex Tech, when the kid is in electrical or HVAC or plumbing, they come back to us at night. Those are all post-secondary options. And there isn't one vocational kid that should not be in some sort of post-secondary program, because that's where the money is. You know, you can talk to Brian Creaney as long as the day is, and we're working with him on making sure those kids stay in the trades. But also, they'll make more money if they continue and pursue their education in that particular field.
Okay, now let me step back a second on the assessment part of it. This was just a curiosity thing I heard from the previous meeting with the Board of Selectmen. You were talking about half day at, let's say, Danvers High and half day at Essex Tech. Is that right? That's a half day program?
That's for our partnership programs, yes.
Right, yes, yes. How does that work for an assessment, let's say, for the town of Danvers? How do we get a
So we don't have a partnership with that, with Danvers. We have it with Peabody, Salem, Gloucester, and Beverly. So it ranges depending on the community. So every child, like Steve had said, even though we have less kids coming to us from Danvers for the incoming 9th grade class, the assessment is based on enrollment the year prior. Okay.
Yes.
So so for example, Gloucester had 8 kids in the laborers program last year. That money, we don't get anything. Well, I mean, we got a grant to actually be able to pay for that, but meaning we don't get anything from Gloucester until the year after. And then it is based on what their overall assessment is, not necessarily an assessment for us, but what their school system gets, like between the local aid and then the additional funds being considered a Chapter 74 student. So it really depends on the community. It ranges anywhere from $1,200 to, you know, $6,000 per child that a community gets. But again, it ranges on their budget. So there's really not a consistency factor to say, oh, it's this flat fee. So
we're not presently involved with that program, though. Is that correct?
That is correct. So those communities sought us to start the program. So it all started with Gloucester. Gloucester reached out to us and said, we want to start a laborers program. And so we started that, and we did it through private funding and a donation from the laborers program. So that was our first kind of go at some sort of partnership. The Department of Education came out with a grant. It's called After Dark Partnership Grant. And we were one of 2 schools, the other one being Greater Lawrence Technical School, to have approved After Dark programs. It's a formal approval process. But with that, they were really asking that we seek gateway cities. So the 2 gateway cities that are within our own sending communities is Peabody and Salem. So working with the mayors of Peabody and Salem, as well as their superintendents, we came up with a joint shared memorandum of understanding, which is pretty similar to each other, but again, depending on the community. Last summer at the superintendent conference, the Beverly superintendent came up to me, Sue, and said, I want to do what Peabody and Salem and Gloucester is doing. How do we get on board? So I presented to the mayor, Cahill, as well as to their school committee, the partnership program, and they signed on board to a memorandum of understanding. What this does, though, we target specific populations. So the grant has to target the EL population, which is English language learners, as well as special education students. So we're really trying to capture a population of students that may be underserved in a vocational school or may not know about us. You know, if you, in Salem, there's a lot of transient members of the community that are newcomers that kind of come in August, say, and they don't even know that we exist. So we really are working with the EL coordinators in those programs or in those communities, as well as special education directors, to make sure that it's the right fit. But we're only in year 2, so it's really kind of time will tell. We have been very fortunate to have received 1 grant from, or actually 3 grants from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, plus a private foundation of the Smith Family Foundation of another $300,000 to be able to support this. And really the intention is that it's seed money in order for you to kind of get it going. And it's a half day. So they come to us, they go to their academic, and it's for incoming grade 11 students. So it has to be there's a lot of different things, but it has to be a 900-hour program. And
Right.
so they come in as grade 11 students, and then they graduate grade 12 with the same competencies as a kid that spent 3.5 years in the shop. And the reason why is because they're coming to us every day, as opposed to every other week of a traditional shop.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, CR, and maybe if I have some questions, you can get back to me after everyone has a chance, okay? Thank you.
Sure thing, Paul. Up next, Gina.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just to piggyback on one of Paul's questions, I guess I'm concerned about the timing of our allocation as well. So if the Essex Tech budget is revised, but we've already adopted the initial number, what will the actual amount we owe change? Maybe Steve can help with it.
It would not change unless we went back to you and you had a special town meeting.
So we've had the situation in years past where the amount that the town meeting appropriates doesn't end up being the actual assessment. Typically, it ends up being a little lower. So in those cases, we would have a balance in that warrant article that we could use to offset next year's assessment. So, you know, because the assessment is tax supported, we have to have revenue to cover the assessment. So the warrant that's being drafted right now for next week carries the 3 million and change assessment. And It sounds like the tech may be able to provide a general idea of what their scenario planning looks like, but the warrant itself will need to carry the $3 million figure. It wouldn't be prudent to reduce that based on the planning document and then offsetting, reducing our revenue and then finding out later that it was actually the original figure. So the document that we prepared will carry the preliminary assessment of $3 million. If the Essex Tech School Committee were to reduce that, we would still appropriate the $3 million into the warrant article, and then we would have that. We would only pay what we're assessed, and so there'd be a balance next year.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Gina. Mike Landers. Oh. Mike, hold on a second. You're still muted.
It's Jen. I'm just having some trouble getting him off mute.
There you go.
Okay, so we've got option A, which is what you gave us. We've got option B, which is between $200,000 and $400,000 less on your $31 million budget, depending upon negotiations with unions.
No,
And option C, which is about $80,000 less,
no. So option B.
also dependent upon unions.
No. Option B nets you $1,022,000 is option B. Option C.
That's what how much it is.
Option C nets you $1.2 million.
Off of your existing $31.7 million budget.
Correct.
Right. So I'm misunderstanding this. So option C nets less money than option B does.
No. No. Option
1.22 is not.
No, $1,022,000 is option B.
Well, okay. Okay, so there's a $200,000 difference.
220,000, yes. Yep.
Okay.
And
But you
that's
haven't
what-
negotiated. You haven't negotiated that with your union yet, right? You're just in the preliminary stages of negotiating that.
We're working on that. Yep.
Are you in preliminary stages of? Are you negotiating with them right now?
Yeah, we do not have a signed MOU with them, if that's what you're asking.
What if they don't give you a signed MOU? They decide. Are you prepared to make layoffs?
Of course we are. We don't have a choice. I mean, again, we need to get a budget that reduces, the strain on everyone. I mean, we are all obviously in these uncharted waters. So we will do whatever it takes and what we need to do to have as little impact to student services as possible. But if necessary, we have to make those necessary cuts. It's like anybody else is doing. There's not one person out there that's not thinking about that. It's, you read the newspaper every day and everyone is making cuts. So yes, of course.
Did you contemplate not accepting 100 additional students?
You can't do that once the admissions process is already in full swing. We did not. So we didn't add 100 additional students. What it is we have in year 4, right? So our seniors that are graduating is 100 less than what we currently enroll. So we're not necessarily taking in 100 more, but as our enrollment evens out and flatlines, you have that kind of last year right, of lower numbers for enrollment. So we're taking in the same number of students that we took in the year before, but because those seniors were at 340 graduating, that's where the 100 kids come in.
So your last two classes, the one that's a freshman this year and the one that's coming in next year is 440 students?
420, yeah, between 420 and 440, because you always have attrition. I mean, over time in a school system, kids move out of the school system, you know, kids come into the school system, so.
Why can't
yeah.
you just not, I mean, have you can't limit the number of people that come in rather than make, I don't, it seems to me that to expand the operation in light of this, you know, when we look at our school system, for example, we don't have the luxury, so to speak, of limiting whoever happens to live in Danvers and who happens to be school age to going to that school. So we're faced with a student population that is what it is, and we deal with that, and we've been able to make cuts, and we've been able to renegotiate contracts with our unions, and we've been able to do a lot of things to keep our budget at 1%, roughly. Despite that student body, you could just keep your student body to what it was this year. You are
can't do
increasing
that.
Next year by 100.
But you can't do that if your enrollment process has already started. You can't, if you're already
Well, they
in
haven't
full
gone to school yet.
swing of so are we gonna tell the people that got accepted, sorry, just joking? We can't do that. You can't do that.
Tell them they go to their public schools. It's not like we're telling them they can't go to school.
We cannot
But,
tell
I mean,
students, yeah.
The bottom line is this, and I'm just going to leave it at this because this is me, and the rest of the board can make a decision however they want with this. But I think it's absolutely ridiculous that this group has come before us, whatever the reason is, with 3 potential prospects for what might be their budget. The budget that they've actually got has not changed. We've been in this for 8 weeks, 9 weeks. And yet now all of a sudden, we're not going to have the meetings until June. I can't vote on this budget. I can't vote on it. And if you have to come back to us in a special town meeting in order to do that, then I'd be fine that we do it. But I can't, in good conscience, vote for a budget that has that's floating around by $1.5 million. I'll leave it at that.
I can respect that.
Sally, Kearns?
I listened the other night to your presentation before the selectmen and last year as well. And this is my second or third. Either way, it's always it's a very impressive program that you have. I had asked about the composition, I guess, of your classes and how you determine how many kids from various communities in relation to the interest that is shown through applications. So I received back through Steve a chart of all applicants. Looks like a screenshot of a spreadsheet. And there are, waiting list, incomings, started, declined after accepted, et cetera, et cetera. And then down the bottom, Peabody 207, Salem 182, Danvers 140. So that's how many each community has for students at the tech. Is that right? Danvers?
No, that's how many applicants.
Okay,
Applicants. Yep.
okay. So then do you decide that you will take a certain percentage of?
No, yeah.
So if, for instance, 200 kids from Peabody apply, I don't know what the percentage is relative to the overall applicant pool. What you had 1,300 applicants, almost 1,400.
Yes. Yeah. So we have an approved admissions policy by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is similar to other vocational schools. So there's a set rubric or criteria for the students, and one includes discipline referrals, one includes attendance, one includes grades, one includes recommendation from either the guidance department or the team, and then there's the interview. So once that is all determined and kind of figured out, we have a computer system that we use that actually just kind of pushes out, the 440 kids, and then we give those the top 440 of however that worked out acceptance letters, and then we give them a set number or a set time frame to accept their enrollment, and then we start going off what we call a wait list.
No, but back up, Heidi. Back up. So, how many kids applied from Danvers?
140.
And how many? You don't want to do it for this year. So maybe 2 years ago, how many applied and how many Danvers students were accepted? I'm trying to gauge.
Yeah, I'm not sure on how many applied, but I know that 67 grade 9 students from Danvers. So it does fluctuate each year because we don't have a set amount, but that's what Steve actually has asked of our school committee to come up with, whether or not we do a maximum enrollment for Danvers, to say, okay, we will only accept, say, 50 students from Danvers each year. And then that way you can kind of be guaranteed that that's, unless it goes under the 50.
Well, from any community, right? I mean, so I guess what I'm wondering is, I don't know, if you look way down at the bottom, off to the right of that chart, Lawrence has 34 kids.
Yeah, so they're not part of our sending community. Lawrence has only access to our agricultural programs, and so they are limited in the number of seats. So we have 110 of the 440 seats that we have offered to students. 110 of those students are coming only for our agricultural programs, which means those are the members those are the non-member towns. So anything not from the 17. So then 330 approximately are coming from those 17 communities. And obviously,
one quarter are from outside of the sending communities?
Yes.
That's curious to me. Does anyone else find that curious?
It's, we have an agreement. I mean, obviously being part of an agricultural school, when the two schools came together, we had to reserve a number of seats for agricultural education. When the old county government or county Essex Aggie. Yeah. So we are kind of required to hold a certain number of seats, and it ranges anywhere from 85 to 110.
Right, but it's agricultural except that it's restricted by outside the border. So it's a little bit confusing to me. I mean, either it's because they're ag interested, which wouldn't have anything to do with where they live, you could be within the sending community area and be interested. But this is somehow this categories where it's saying you're outside of the sending community area, but you're interested in agriculture. I mean,
Yeah, and that's required, but yeah, it's required by our, we have bylaws, but also by special legislation of when the schools came together, they did not want to lose the agricultural component. So we have 8 agricultural programs. So our in-district students have access to those programs as well. It's just that we save a certain number of seats for the out of district or ag kids because they can't get it anywhere else, because there's only 2 other agricultural schools in the state, which are on the western part of the state and not on this side. So that's why we have to save those seats for agriculture in Essex County, Suffolk County, and Middlesex County.
all right. So I guess that's sort of an interesting rabbit hole, but so thank you for explaining it. My main interest is trying to understand, to kind of get to Mike's question about, you know, how do you limit the number of students from one community? Do other communities limit the number that do they set their own cap and say, oh, we can only send you 20 students this year, we can't send you 25? Is that something that goes on?
They don't do that now. Steve had sent a letter to open up the conversations about that. And that is something that gets approved by, or presented and approved by our school committee. There are a couple vocational school systems that do that. So Shawshene Tech actually does do that, for example. But Shawshene Tech has 16 people on a waiting list, as opposed to hundreds of people on a waiting list. So even though they have these numbers and they're dealing with, say, 5 communities or 6, they don't necessarily have the wait list that kind of we're experiencing, which is obviously a challenge. However, we did get notification from the Associate Commissioner Cliff Chung, who is in charge of career and tech ed, is that if Danvers were to want, say, a cap, we could actually have it just for Danvers and not for all of our sending communities. So it's not something that has to go across all 17. I think some people are not too concerned about a cap. You know, in our smaller communities like Magnolia or Essex, you know, Manchester, or Marblehead, it's not probably as much of a concern as it is for our top 5 communities, which is Gloucester, Peabody, Salem, Beverly, and Danvers.
And would you say that there are more applications of the top 5? Where do you get the most applications from?
Peabody.
And the most acceptances. So it is relative to how many applications each community receives.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really, obviously it can range year to year because of the system, the algorithm that it uses. However, the top 5 have always been the top 5 since we opened this building. So the top 5 communities that we service the most kids from have always been those 5 communities.
Okay, interesting. Do you do recruitment nights or something?
Not nights. We do have an open house in November, and then we go into the middle schools to talk about our programs. And it depends on which school. So they might go to an auditorium and we bring kids. So say if the student is from Danvers and we go to the Danvers schools, we'll actually bring kids that live in Danvers to go to the middle school with our guidance counselors to talk about the programs.
So I don't mean this to sound, not nice, but why do you recruit if you have such a long wait list?
We talked about that now with COVID, that we may need to be looking at that differently. And I think we recruit because it's an option for a school system, as a public school, for kids to see what programs we have. It's really more about what programs we have. It is a very different type of learning. I will say there are kids that they can't learn in an every other week scenario. There are kids that need, math and English every day. And so they can't, sometimes the transition to our school can be really challenging as well. You're now asking a child to be in a shop setting for 6 or 7 hours a day, being taught by the same teacher. So, there's not always that, kind of bell to bell type movement. There's a lot more kind of responsibility. We do treat them as adults when they're in the shop, because as you can imagine, if they're using a lathe, they could cut their arm off pretty easily. So, the expectations of behavior is really important. And so sometimes, a student may be like, I don't want this. And, they may leave us because of that. And maybe they come back. Actually, we had one student that left us, and he came back as a junior, and now he's getting the director's award because he owns his own landscaping business. But he said, I needed that year to kind of mature and grow up and realize what I really wanted. So every child is different, but we basically recruit more about the type of programs that we offer, from a trade perspective.
Last question. So are you going to go to every sending community and say, I don't have a budget? How are you going to get your budget passed?
Well, I go to sending communities that obviously want me to present to a sending community, but we have to just kind of take it play by play. I know that June 30th, some people may or may not have a budget by June 30th, and we are going to a 1/12 budget. So our budget will be 1/12 starting in July. That's what we're anticipating. So we will have to work within that 1/12 budget, until we can get a budget approved. But I can't revise a budget I can revise a budget of possibilities, but then if the governor comes back and says, oh, well, you're getting half of SOA, you're not going to get all of SOA, well, that impacts the budget then. So we're using these Plan B, Plan C as guidelines until we can get a draft of what the governor's revised budget will be.
So the governor's only the starting point, right? I mean, then it has to go through the House and the Senate.
Yeah, but that's common, because when we presented our budget last year, the governor's budget was not approved when our budget got approved. And so that's why your assessment, when Steve talked about like, what if the assessment goes down? Well, sometimes the assessment goes down because we end up getting more revenue that then decreases the assessment. So.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Good luck, and good luck to your seniors.
Thank you.
Among the brokenhearted seniors everywhere. And
I know.
Yeah, it's a shame. Thank you.
It's challenging. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Next, we'll turn to Mike Daly.
Good evening, Dr. Riccio.
Hi.
I've got a little question here about do you have night school or encourage veterans or citizens, adults to go into a night school type of courses?
Yes, we actually have a very large night school program, and it's growing actually. And sometimes in tough financial situations like these, people start to really rethink what their career pathways are. So you'll see our night school more than likely increasing in enrollment, as well as community colleges, because they start to say, well, geez, this job, like if you think about what jobs were still gainfully employed during this pandemic, it was residential construction, it was health careers. So that could give us a rise in our adult education. We also work very closely with our veterans. We have a veterans dog training program on our facility that we give them the space rent-free, so we don't charge any rent at all. But they have been a great resource for us. The veterans also can come and use our services at a reduced or no cost. So if they go into our grooming lab, we do not charge them, to have their service animals groomed. We also have a connection, as you know, we have Angel Animal Hospital in our facility now, and veterans get special rates for their service animals or for their animals. They don't even have to be service animals. So we give discounts to those veterans. We also have, in addition to the trade training that we have, like electrical, plumbing, HVAC, advanced manufacturing as well, we also have kind of pop-up shop training. So if somebody wants to take a photography class or an Italian cooking class, they can do so. We're also in works with North Shore Community College. When Essex Aggie Institute actually closed, North Shore Community College took over their Culinary Arts Associate's degree program and their cosmetology program, and they're renting space at the old North Shore Tech in Middleton. Their lease is up, so we're working with them to actually have a culinary arts adult program as well as the cosmetology adult program at our school on nights and weekends. So definitely, we are definitely a community school. The governor wants vocational schools. He calls them 3 shifts. It's your day kids, it's your after dark kids, and then it's your adult population at night. And he wants that school operating basically 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so we put in an application for a Career and Technical Institute, it's CTI, with the governor's office. And what that does is it provides training for either displaced workers, unemployed workers, or underemployed workers at no cost. And they're trained for jobs that are needed, like advanced manufacturing, electrical, plumbing, HVAC. So, those career workforce, it's really workforce development, but we are definitely working with them. We also have a partnership with Essex County Sheriff's Department, and they're renting half of Gallant Hall for their training. So they'll be doing training of their employees on our site during this school day on the south side of campus.
Very good. And does some of the tuitions that they pay, does that help offset the budget costs?
Yeah, I mean, that's how we're able to get to a 1.6% increase from last year's assessment. That is directly related to our grants, our revenues any revenue source offsets what the cost is that you incur.
All right. Now, normally we get more of a breakdown. In other words, I'm looking at the budget book under administration 1,000, and that's got total superintendent's office, an increase of 133,586. Are we going to get another sheet that breaks that down more like you normally would do, or is this it?
Yeah, I can definitely have Marie send that to you. I thought that was already sent in a separate document, but that increase was actually, it's not necessarily an increase to the budget. It's a budget transfer from one line to another line. So, for example, our director of curriculum and instruction was given a title change to assistant superintendent. So that position actually just got moved. So it got taken out of the director's position and moved into our line item.
Okay. One other question. On the 4,000 total extra maintenance. Can you explain?
Extraordinary maintenance.
Yeah, extraordinary maintenance, an
Yeah.
additional, 79.55% increase. $227,500 more.
Yeah, I don't act, so I'm gonna lean to Marie, because I'm sure she has that up right now. Because I don't want to give you the wrong information. There were a couple projects that were put in there. So again, I don't want to give you misinformation. So if you just allow possibly Marie to have her
Hi
sound
there.
on.
Yep, hi there. Hi, everyone. That is basically related to some contingencies as we are in negotiations for, with the ASME union. So it's basically related to that. We do have $100,000 in that line item for stabilization as well. But it's mostly related to negotiations and possible increases for our contingency account.
Okay. I think everybody else has covered a lot of the other topics, so I guess I'm through for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Sally Calhoun?
Thank you. Can you hear me, CR? Am I on yet?
Yeah. Yep,
Thank-
you're on. Go ahead.
Thank you. It is a significant expense in our budget, there's no doubt about it, and I appreciate the efforts of the school committee and the superintendent to have their plan B, plan C to bring this down as much as they're able in light of the economic circumstances. But you know, the questions I had have pretty much all been addressed. But you know, I think this school is a real asset to our community and to the kids in our community. It disturbs, it worries me when I hear people talk about maybe putting a cap on the number of students from Danvers who'll be given the opportunity to apply and go to this school. It sounds like there's a complex algorithm that's used for selecting applicants that are accepted or not. It doesn't sound to me like the town they're from is one of the factors, but it's hard to tell. I guess I just don't want to take this opportunity away from kids in Danvers to attend school there. I wish our assessment wasn't as expensive. Definitely the numbers are something to be worried about, but it's a good opportunity, and I think the educational and service opportunities for the rest of our community are really good. I really want to support the school. I just thought I'd toss that out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Ted?
I have a couple quick questions, and this I might need Steve's help on this first one. So the Danvers assessment went up 23%, right? And if I look at the enrollment participation of increase of 15.73%, and I look at the per pupil cost of 1.6, that gets me to like a neighborhood of 17 or 18. Am I not comparing apples to apples there? Can somebody explain to me how the Danvers assessment went up 23% and in the Essex budget, the per pupil assessment for Danvers went up by 1.6 and enrollment went up by 16? You guys
I think,
there's basically like a 5% gap. I'm trying to figure out where that comes from.
I'm probably not as qualified as Dr. Riccio. My understanding is that it's a function of both. There is a socioeconomic variable in the formula,
So it's based on your proportionate share of the student population as well as your total student count. I'm not sure about the 1.6. I know that year over year, the total assessment is up closer to 6%. And, you know, it's up $980,000 year over year, and ours at $578,000 is about 60% of the total assessment increase year over year. But that's about the extent of my ability to speak to how the formula works.
So obviously it's a state formula based on what revenues are taken in and taxes and business and industry that is in that area, and then your rating. So the 1.6 is what is over from the year prior, but it's a per pupil rate and not necessarily an overall. So obviously if you were to multiply, you know, the additional students that we took in this year, you know, you'd obviously be paying more because it's a per pupil.
Yeah.
If you were to, and Marie could probably talk about the formula a little bit more, but it is a state, we don't create the formula. It is a state formula that really, there's little control. There's been a lot of talk about changing that state formula, and I think it's going to take a lot of legislation and a lot of people to kind of come together and figure out, you know, a formula. I will say that our per pupil expenditure is more than the 16,000, you know, 600 that we actually would bill you, that we're billing you. In addition to that, I mean, not that I'm trying to fight, I am fighting for a budget, but if the kids don't come to us and go to Danvers High School, you still have to pay for that kid and you still get that money from the state. And so the differential is about $600 to what you're spending on a Danvers High School student to what we're spending for a vocational student. So if all of those, you know, 100 and et cetera, students were to go to Danvers High School, that money obviously stays in the city, which is fabulous, but you still have an expense to pay for those kids.
Yeah, no, it's less there. It's less that. I'm just trying to understand what I'm missing when our assessment goes up by 23%, and you know, as you guys lay out quite clearly, that the student enrollment from Danvers is up roughly 16%, and the cost per pupil is up 1.6, so that gets you to 18. So there's like 5%.
Oh, you
see what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to. I'm trying to understand from like a budget guy. Like, okay, you know, like up 1.6% year over year. That seems quite reasonable. You know, and the enrollment increase is what it is, and we can talk all night about that. But it's more of a okay. So that both of those I can check those boxes, but it's the 5%. The additional assessment that I'm trying to understand where that comes from.
Can I just interject for 1 minute?
Yeah.
Just to might help clarify.
Yeah,
so
please save me if you can.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the that 15%, that is a percentage of the total enrollment for the school, but Danvers enrollment is actually up 21%. They went from 150 students to 182. So I think that might.
That's in the budget. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that might close your gap a little bit.
Yep, that probably nails the whole thing. Thank you. So then the next question is a little higher level. Just looking at enrollment, you know, in your report over the last 5 years, the size of the school has increased by about 20%. Where do you see that in 5 years?
Well, we'll be maxed out. So really our maximum capacity for the total number of students is 1,600. We really cannot increase any further than that. So that's really the maximum. We are at 1,500 right now. So we're anticipating that next year we are already at our maximum capacity. So as you can imagine, in 2014, when we opened, there was only about 793 students, I think, and it was as a result of being a brand new school, and you can't have 1,500 kids and think you're going to be able to pay for all of those new teachers and new services. So over time, we have gradually increased enrollment to get to our maximum capacity.
Okay.
And I think it's
So-
also important to note that the governor, because of the Northeastern Report of 2015, has really made a point of maximizing capacity in all vocational schools across the Commonwealth. And they want to know why schools are not at maximum capacity and what do they do to get to maximum capacity. So that's obviously a charge that we have as well. That's a balance. We're trying to balance it.
So from a long range planning standpoint, within Danvers for the high school, it would be fair to assume that the sort of incoming class sizes from Danvers now are probably going to average out to be roughly the same in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine consistent with the numbers that we see right now. We saw last year we saw 67 students enrolled.
Yep.
Right now we see 49. So that's a little bit of a difference that we're kind of like, oh, why is that? So, but it will level itself out. We believe that after next year, that's kind of our max capacity and it's going to level itself out.
Okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Heidi, question for you. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on over on the South Campus side and what the construction's for and what the intent of those of the project is?
Sure. So there's a couple different, in 2018, we completed a study with GNAP Associates of the South Campus. The South Campus is obviously the old Essex Agricultural School. The result of that study basically stated what buildings would be cost effective to keep and what buildings would not be cost effective, meaning if we were to upgrade and update them to today's, standards. So the decision was made to do demolition work for McNamara O'Shea. That is the large science building that was kind of set back because the cost to update that outweighed what the value of the building was or whatever capacity we could have. So that money the money to demolish that was used out of leftover MSBA funds from the building project. So we had a set number of funds that was available from MSBA when we built the new building, and it was specifically stated that we needed to use it obviously for educational purposes of kind of building, et cetera. So that was that demolition project, which is near completion. There's still some fill, and there will not be anything that's going there in its place. The old Larkin Cottage, which was the Memorial Cottage, the Catherine Larkin, it was the light green cape. That also was in disrepair, but also in order for us to renovate it and use it as a learning facility, as you can imagine, it was a old 1950s broken up cape. So it really wouldn't have been it would have been a learning opportunity from a building and construction, but not necessarily for future learning and development. So we have created the Larkin Memorial Cottage project, which we are anticipating, and we've already raised some funds and received grant funding for. And we will continue to honor veteran Catherine Larkin. She was a female who was killed in the line of duty in World War II. She was a nurse in the Army Corps. She was also a graduate of Essex Aggie in the homemaking school, and she was a resident of Salem, Massachusetts. So we are continuing to honor her memory, but also the memory of other veterans that have served. And the cottage will house, it'll be a community center. So it'll be a learning center for our students. It will also have a full service kitchen in there for training. We will be able to rent it out, or people can use it obviously as a community space. It will also house an agricultural library. As you can imagine, Essex Aggie has rich history on the North Shore, and we have many artifacts that are literally sitting on the top floor of Smith Hall right now. And we would like to be able to showcase them and have events and have a full library kind of agriculture on the North Shore on this part of the state. That is one of the sites that long-term our students, North Shore Community College culinary students may be using that as a training facility as well. And so it's really a community-based center, multi-use center, and it will be built by our students. So we anticipate that it is a 2 to 3 year project pending funding, and obviously pending our students' work, because as you can imagine, they're in training. So, you know, a carpenter that could do a job in 6 months is going to take a grade 11 kid 2 years to complete. So really the intention is to start the project in the summer, and then we'll continue it through until it's done. The other building called Gallant Hall, that is where Company to Heroes is located. So that's where they do dog training for service animals for veterans, and they teach the veterans and the service animals how to live in a house. So they have a mock apartment in there, plus they also have training, and they use that weekly in the evenings, and then they allow our students to do dog training, animal training during the day, and we do not charge for that. In 2 of those rooms, we have an early education and care program for students that have disabilities. It's similar to early intervention, but it's for kids that are older than 3 and younger than 7. And so 2 of the classrooms in there, they pay us a very nominal fee, and it really is, it's part of an early education grant from Mass Department of Education. And the fee that they pay us is really just for heat and electricity, and then the renovations that we had to make in order to make that usable. And then the Essex County Sheriff's Department, we have invested some of our money into renovating that area, and they're taking up 3 classroom spaces in Gallant Hall, as well as office space. They have also supplemented some of the renovations. They have given us $15,000 towards the renovations, but we have it's more like new LED lighting, new ceiling, grid tiles, painting, more cosmetic. Because Gallant Hall is a 1-floor building, we didn't run into the ADA compliance concerns that we ran into with McNamara O'Shea, because we don't need an elevator because it's all on 1 floor, where the science building needed an elevator, plus the railings, all the door frames, and et cetera. That's Gallant. And so we'll be looking at continuing the renovation. So there's 6 other classroom spaces that are unoccupied right now. Depending on where our re-entry plan goes for the fall, if we have to mix up some of our students or have less students in school at the time, we may be using it for classroom space. If not, we are working with Uniquely Abled. It's a special education program for kids with autism. And the kids with autism are trained in the advanced manufacturing industry. And part of this program, they cannot be in the same room as other advanced manufacturing students. So it's a specialized program for them. The other 2 classrooms, we are looking at expanding our plumbing program for adult education. And then we have the alumni gymnasium, which actually the town of Danvers will use. It has basketball courts. It has a basketball court in there, but it also has a stage. And so the renovations that we're doing there are primarily just to bring it up to code. Again, it's one large kind of open space. So we're looking at making the bathrooms ADA compliant, the doors ADA compliant, a ramp in one of the areas, and then the MSBA roof project that we have is to renovate just the roof of the alumni gym. Smith Hall, where the administrative or my office is, the second floor of Smith Hall, our students renovated that space and renovated that classroom space, and that's intended to be used for adult education. So if we run an adult education program during the day, it does not interfere with the day students that are across the street.
Thank you. I appreciate all of the detail. I wasn't expecting so much. So I
sorry.
guess I have, no, that's okay. I have two real comments more than anything. One would be just a concern as you continue to succeed, a concern about bringing students across 62 to the south side of the campus, because I know one of the selling points I recall back when we were forming this new school was to keep everyone on one side of 62. And then the other piece would just be obviously that these are ideal places to cut as the budget seems to be a little bit tighter this year. So, but I appreciate the detail. Thank you.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate that. I will say that the funds that we're using are grant funds through the Cummings Foundation this summer. So we're very fortunate. The other renovations also are either through private donations or obviously MSBA funding sources, where we do get 49% reimbursement, 49.9%. But I definitely understand the movement from one side to the other. You're not the first person that has said that, actually, which I'm curious about, only because my first year there was in 2017, and I don't think there was a day that I didn't see landscaping kids, arbor kids, horticulture students, and our drama kids use it on any given day. So it was kind of a surprise when I first heard it, but I completely understand, and I'm very appreciative of transportation director, I think it is, Alan, who has really helped us in trying to get some of those challenges faced and reduced.
Thank you. Heidi, I know I speak for all of us on the committee in saying thank you for coming out, both to you, Marie, and to Wayne for being here this evening and taking our questions and taking away some of your time. So thank you very much for being here. And we look forward to voting on the warrant article next week. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is currently 8:33. We've been at this for just about 2.5 hours, and I'm going to ask the indulgence of our school superintendent here in Danvers, her staff, and our school committee that we take a very quick 7-minute break, and that we resume at 8:40, and we'll get right back to it. But we just want to get up and stretch our legs and get a glass of water, I'm sure, but I'm going to hold everyone to that 8:40 start, and we'll be right back. So everyone just stand by, and we'll see you then. Danvers Public Schools. Lisa, if you could move forward with your presentation, please.
Thank you. For tonight, Keith Taverna will be making the presentation on behalf of the school committee. And we have school committee members and Mary Beth Berry as our chair that are here this evening that all of us will be able to answer your questions. Thank you. Keith?
So we'll start by walking through our budget of how it was originally proposed and presented to you in the full packet, and then what reductions that we've made in light of revenue projections across statewide. So our budget from the beginning was a 3.76% increase, focusing on two main priorities: our contractual obligations and our special education out of district tuitions. As Mr. Bartha mentioned earlier, we did see a significant increase in the special education out of district tuition budget based on 10 additional students who moved into town. The way the law is structured is that if a student moves in from another town, they have the right to stay in the school that they're currently attending. So those, it's called stay put. So those students are in their out-of-district placements, and our goal over the next school year is to establish relationships with those families and see if those students have a fit with our in-district programs that we've worked hard over recent years to build, to bring them back in district and hopefully save some money in the future. We continue to try to maximize our current resources and reallocate to focus on our strategic plan initiatives of student engagement and social emotional learning. Overall, the budget includes a net decrease of 0.75 positions. We do see increases in enrollment really starting to come to fruition for the next calendar year and the next fiscal year. So there is an increase of 1.0 elementary school teachers for the Smith School as that school continues to grow and the grade level cohorts work through the system. There's an additional 0.25 special education teacher that we had to add during the 2019-20 school year that is also now being added in as part of the base for next year, along with a 1.0 learning center teacher, 2 aides, and a 0.2 speech pathologist. All three of those are to support special education students at the elementary level that are in learning centers. So that's one program as a whole. And again, that is something that we've had to add mid-year during 2019-20 that we're now looking to add into our base budget for FY21. We also do have some fluctuating enrollments and decreasing enrollments at other parts of the district. So at Thorpe School, we have smaller cohorts and class sizes in different grade level cohorts. So there's a reduction of 2.0 teachers at the Thorpe School. We feel the class size will still be manageable and allow the teachers to operate effectively. Additionally, the high school enrollment is down from around 1,000 students at one point to 900 students now. So there's a 3.0 FTE reduction of teachers at Danvers High School, including a world language teacher, a social studies teacher, and a health teacher. So again, that was kind of what our initial budget proposal was. And then as we've gone into March and the state of emergency hit, we have looked at making our phase 1 reductions of approximately 400,000. We've also began to identify additional items or additional positions that we could reduce should we need to go into a phase 2 if revenue projections aren't where they are being presented tonight. No additional layoffs are included in the $400,000 reduction, but there is an additional 2 position reduction of teacher aides, one at the middle school and one at the high school, but both of those reductions will be done through attrition. We do have a tentative agreement with our Danvers Teachers Association, and we want to thank them for their collaborative nature, as Mr. Barth stated earlier, as all the town unions have stepped up to have conversations with us. You'll also see a decrease in contracted services as well as some supply lines as part of the secondary or the phase 1 reductions. Overall, this brings our budget increase to 2.8%. What I would like to note is that 430,000 of that increase on the special education out of district tuitions. So without that, the overall budget increase would be 1.78%. That is really attributed almost wholly to contractual obligations. And I think that's just the brief overview. You have the full budget in front of you, and we're happy to answer what questions you have.
Thank you, Keith. We'll start with Ted Blake.
Oh, wow. Keith, I guess the first question I have is, you guys, of the folks that came in for the special ed mid school year, do you have a line of sight on which ones of those you think you should be able to successfully place within the district over the next year or two?
We would say at least 3 or 4 that we feel like we could bring back in district that fit nicely into our program. So now it's working with those families to introduce them to the program and show them that it is an equal program to where their students currently attending.
And does that is that an optional thing for them to? How does that process? Like, how does that conversation work? I guess.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
So again, the stay put means that really they get to stay at the school that they're at should they choose to reject the IEP. That's the way the law is written. And then there are steps that we could take with the Bureau of Special Education Appeals to challenge where the placement is, depending on what our backup data is. And it turns into a time-intensive, unfortunately, it hurts the relationships with parents and a money-intensive process, as we have our lawyers that handle those types of cases.
Okay. Then, so the enrollment at the high school, obviously we just had the Essex conversation. There are 3 teaching headcounts reduced there. Are we at the point in the enrollment decline where we might start losing the ability to offer a wide variety of AP classes or other electives that people take, or do you feel like it's not an issue for you guys at all?
I feel like we're okay with where this phase 1 reduction brings us. Our phase 2 reductions, where we've identified our additional high school positions, which would begin to hurt that spectrum of classes that we're able to offer. We've also, in recognition of Essex Tech's numbers increasing in their active recruitment strategy, we've also begun to think about putting into place how we do our own active recruitment, which we haven't done in the past, to make sure we're providing families the most up-to-date information about what's happening at Danvers High School.
And are the applications to the tech increasing every year in parallel with the matriculation, or is the acceptance rates? I guess if we reach like a point of saturation in applications to the tech, and now they're just accepting a higher percentage of qualified students, or are applications still on the increase?
Applications, I would say, have been relatively stable over recent years, maybe a slight uptick, and that the acceptance percentages have increased for Danvers students.
Okay. I think that's pretty much it for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ted. Sally Calhoun.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith and Dr. Dana, together this budget and then reducing it in light of the circumstances. I wanted to ask you some questions about what's going on right now within the schools in town. So kids have been home. What's the teaching that's going on now?
It's the remote teaching. So all of our teachers are working with their grade level teams to put together the remote learning assignments. The state has said it should be about half of what a school day is. So our website has all of this information outlined, and we continue to update that information. But teachers are having putting mostly the videos together, because we have the equity pieces, and families have different situations at home. So there's a blend of videos that teachers are putting together for lessons and activities. And then there's also some times where the teachers are having the live pieces, and that's with Google Meet. We've been using Google Classroom and Google Docs as our way to communicate with our students. And because we have had the one-to-one initiative with the Chromebooks through 6 through 12, through our work with the town and support, that has been beneficial. And then we've been able to have loaner Chromebooks from our elementary schools to the families that needed them.
So 6 to 12, all those kids already had Chromebooks.
Yes.
So kindergarten through 5th grade are offering them to families that need them and so on and so forth. Do you have any sense of what level of participation from the kids that you have?
The participation is high. We are looking at consistent engagement and those connections with the school. So any family within those first couple of weeks that we did not hear from, we communicated with them, reached out, whether it was beginning with email, the phone, even support from our school resource officers to make sure to do a wellness check. So there's ongoing communication with all families. The engagement will vary from family to family and sometimes child to child in a family. But we do have systems in place to check that. And this week we did just send out a survey to our parents to ask for feedback on how the first 2 phases were technically in what we call phase 3 of our remote learning, which takes us through the end of the school year.
I think a lot about all those families with learning at home, parents at home, kids at home. It must be such a challenge. I just admire anybody that can pull it off. What about meals? I don't know the percentage for kids in Danvers that qualify for breakfast and lunches at school, but are we doing anything to support food safety or availability for families?
Thanks. Keith, want to take that one?
Sure. So we've been serving between 700 and 1,000 meals a week to families and residents in need. So the program has really been supporting both children, veterans, elderly, or any citizen in the town of Danvers that's in need. So that program has been going since the initial closure and will run at least through June 18th. So between 700 and 1,000 meals a week.
Now, in case people who have a need might be listening, how would they sign up for such a program? What's the process?
So there's a lunch order form that is linked to our website, or they could also call Town Hall and they would help get the information to us. And then there's even an email address that is lunch@danvers.org for people to place orders through if they, this is their first time, and then we'll send them the link for the form for future orders.
And do people come to a school to pick up a meal? How does it work?
So pickup is an option. We, however, only probably have 3 or 4 people a day that pick up. We then have a team of volunteers that are the staff of the school department that sign up each day, about 10 people that go out and deliver lunches to families. So it's a no contact delivery system, but they deliver the lunches, and it's actually the same team that have helped deliver the Chromebooks when families have been in need, and paper packets for families that need them. And so it's been a great group of every day I log in to check the spreadsheet to make sure, and is so pleased to see that people are stepping up to help the process.
Wonderful to hear. I haven't really had a lot of time to delve into the budget. It's always so well laid out. One kind of area of questions I had is in the detail of non-salary accounts, the pages that begin with D1, et cetera. So all of these items that are listed, are these increases from prior year, or this is the dollar amount that's being sought this year for the various listed items?
Those are the actual dollar amounts for each line. So that's the full value. If you look at pages really A6 and A7, that's where you'll see the increased amounts laid out. And that page just includes the full detail and what the description of that spending is in section D.
Thank you very much. That's all I have for now. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sally. We'll move on now to Michael Daly.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at the superintendent's budget. There's no page number, but it says under fiscal year 21, identified needs. And it's got special education, an additional $430,000. for 10 additional students. Does that mean each student, it's costing us $43,000 to educate them?
Unfortunately, the number is much higher than that. That's the net budget number. And as Mr. Bartha talked about earlier, next week, you'll see a transfer to help us close out fiscal year 20 for the special education out of district tuitions. And then as part of that closeout, the circuit breaker account, which is a 2-year grant from the state, it can be carried over 2 fiscal years. We'll be using an offset from the circuit breaker account to make up the difference of approximately 1.1 to 1.4 million, depending on how you look at those numbers.
Okay.
So they average over $100,000, and a residential placement can be up to $260,000 a year.
Okay. I see you did decrease the budget from the original figures down about, what was it? 406, 458 altogether. That's good. Let me go to, A7, 301. I think that's the textbook column. It seems like a large amount now. Is that because a lot of these things that you're talking about are not covered by Chromebooks, or why has it gone up so much?
So the increase is to help fund the adoption of an Algebra 2 textbook at the high school that will align to the latest curriculum standards released by the state. The number has become more stable over recent years because textbooks have switched from a physical book that you would buy and keep for 5 years, and with Chromebooks, they've become recurring expenses for access to the electronic versions of those textbooks. So you'll see that it's kind of stayed level where you used to see fluctuations up and down in larger dollar values than this in the past.
All right. C14. I can get my, a lot to go through here, but the student support aid. Explain that one, please.
So on that page, that's the one position that's represented by a collective bargaining agreement. They had an agreement in place that runs through fiscal year 21. So you'll see that that accounts for their COLA as well as the cost of steps. And those are the aids that help support the social emotional learning of students within the building.
Thank you. D3, high school, 607554. We don't have a book here, so we gotta flip around. Yeah, let's say 62,554. Can you explain that one, please?
So about $32,000 of that is for the new Algebra 2 textbook that we talked about. And then the other half of the money is to help pay for additional books for the World Language Department, as well as a small textbook adoption for history and the Social Studies Department for some AP classes.
Okay, that's the part I was talking about. The world language. What are you telling me there? I don't understand that.
So the world language, we've tried to switch from a traditional textbook where we're talking about congregating verbs and that type of to a real world application to make students more fluent. So with that, we've needed to adjust the curriculum resources to be more of a fluency model than a traditional world language instructional delivery.
All right. D7. And that would be 80511, program development.
Yep, so this line is what funds a lot of our professional development that we have for the district in different programs. So we run a skillful teacher program for our second year teachers to help them craft, further craft their skill set. We run a skillful leader program for any new administrators that we have. We have administrator team training and consulting, professional learning communities, mentor training for our Off to a Great Start program, which is for our first year teachers in the district. It also pays for the NEASC accreditation and follow-up action plans, Power School training and scheduling, and then our Open Circle programs for the elementary and other assessments that we have for students.
All right. One more here. E17 student activities. I don't know if I'm going to get there or not here. I've got too many pages to go through. Here it is. E17 student activities. What are you telling me there at student activities? I can't quite understand that chart. It starts at fiscal year 19, then it goes up to 20, and then all of a sudden there's a number there of 40,776. What does that tell me?
I'm sorry, what page, Mr. Daly?
Page E17, the bottom.
Oh, E17.
Yeah, student activities,
Okay.
subtotal. I didn't quite understand.
So those are the student activity accounts is something that we introduced at the beginning of last fiscal year, and these are money raised by students for the behalf of students. So this is senior class dues. It could be fundraiser that students want to run. It's all their money, so it's all outside of our operating budget. It's not a tax assessment piece, and this is a reporting of what the expenses and revenues to date have been in those accounts.
So the one under fiscal year 20 was 118,124, but this year it's only 40,776? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I can tell you that's the net current balance. So the 118 is the amount of revenues that we've brought in, and our expenses to date have been 97,000. So if you look across and you net out FY19, there was a $20,000 balance that we carried forward, and there's an additional $20,000 that we've gained in balance in that account for this fiscal year.
Okay, so that's all you have right now in that account, 40,000. Okay, all right. One other comment. I don't know, maybe this is for the school committee, but the salary table you have for teachers, there's what, 15 steps? And
There are.
I'm suggesting, as a lot of other people have talked to me about it, that maybe that should be renegotiated to a lot less steps and a lot more stringent direction on the amounts that are in there. I think that should be really renegotiated to a different table, because it's almost like they're getting 2 and 3 raises a year. So it's my comment. I hope somebody on the school committee will just take heed to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. We'll go to Sally Kearns.
Thank you. So thank you, Keith. I had sent a few questions via email because I knew that we'd be in this format. So thank you for answering those. I listened to the school committee meeting the other night. I really want to applaud you all for what you're doing. I have said to many friends, if I'd had to homeschool my kids through this ordeal, it would not have been a very pretty or successful endeavor. I think I'd have just, wrapped it all up about a week and a half into it. So I think we're all seeing how hard teachers work and how challenging their jobs are. So thank you for that. I think it's great that you've been able to identify, is it $400,000 in cuts so far? 406?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I know that there'll be more to come, and I know that you guys know that too. So as I looked, I think we talked a little bit, Keith, about some transportation issues, and maybe there are opportunities for savings or consolidating in that realm. I think it's wonderful if in fact you can get to a place where, well, that was a school committee issue, never mind. I don't have any other specific things other than what we talked about, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Mike Landers?
I hate to put you folks on the spot with this because I don't think you probably have the answer, but it got me thinking, and this goes back a little bit to what we were talking about with the Aggie school. There was an implication made by the superintendent of the Aggie program that if those 185 students were to return to Danvers High School, that somehow that would equate to that $3.1 million simply being applied to us. That basically what they're saying is, you got those kids, what difference is it if we educate them in Danvers or we send them to the Aggie school? Do you have any idea, just for my information, what it would cost us if those 185 students came back into our high school program?
I guess I would say I don't think it would be $3.1 million. I think that, even if we said that we needed to hire 10 additional teachers at $60,000 each, that would be, $600,000 plus the cost of benefits would be somewhere in the tune of $1 million. So I don't believe it would be 3.1 million.
Yeah, thanks. And again, I think that was, I'm not accusing anybody of trying to make that claim, but I think there was sort of that intimation made to people that somehow that was the case. Just quickly, in regards to what you're doing now with the students that we have, are you confident that if we are faced with additional time in the fall, we all can hope that isn't going to happen, but that if we do have to make some adjustments in the fall, both from a budgetary standpoint and probably much more importantly from an operational standpoint, that we're in a good position to be able to do that?
I think I'd start and then ask Keith to add to it. We have a solid foundation. What we're seeing and I think forecasting is when students come back, the social emotional needs of students. We left school on March 13th, and when we come back after Labor Day, if we hope that we're able to, we're still waiting for those guidelines from the state and the federal government, that will be 6 months that students have not seen in person their school or their teachers, their classrooms. So making all those transitions, we'll be really working with all of our families, and it's going to be difficult with less resources to do that. But we have strong teams, we have a strong community, and we'll all work together to support our students and families.
Thanks. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. We'll go next to Gina.
Hi. Unfortunately, I'm just looking at the summary sheet for the education budget. But I did have a question about the managerial reserve. I'm sorry, can you just explain what those funds are for and why there's such an increase?
So that is primarily for our teachers union, which was under negotiations at the time that we passed the budget. We have a tentative agreement with them. They've ratified, and school committee will vote in early June. So as we roll out an operating budget, that number will be significantly decreased as we move those funds into the salary lines once we have that agreement formalized.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Also, the athletic trips I saw doubled from 10,000 to 20,000. Did anyone ask about that?
No, so that's based on historical actuals, and that's something that we've found other funding for over recent years. And we decided that it was just time to take the plunge to really fix that as part of our base and not be looking for funds as we started to cut other things. It actually made us look at some of those other items to make sure as we then have funding to cover it.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for pulling this budget together. I'm sorry we've had to make cuts, but we really appreciate your hard work on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. Paul?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to start off with a question. I wanted to go back to CR, and I think maybe Steve can answer it. It involves the Essex Tech discussion we had about, I'm not sure the correct language, whether it was trying to cap a number of students from Danvers going to the Tech over a 3 or 4 year period. But the question I had when that was brought up, is it even legal through the state to set a cap on, let's say, 120 or 150 children going to the Tech? Would that be acceptable by the state, Steve?
Yes. So we had a conference call with one of the undersecretaries at DESE after we received the assessment in January. And I think the context that we viewed this through, and I think Ted asked the question about Danvers students represent close to 16% of the total student population out at Essex Tech. So we are one of 16 or 17 communities who belong to the school, but we represent 16% of the student body. And the issue that we raised is not so much that is too high or too low. It's that nobody knows. There are no goals, and there's no proportionment right now, as we understand it, in their admissions policies. So when I raised this question with town administrators, town managers, and mayors on the North Shore, who are also members, even some of the smallest communities said, we totally support some sort of methodology for determining what the student population by sending community might look like over time, because although our assessment is flat or down this year, we've had to absorb 50-60% increases in our assessment along the same timeline as you. You're in the middle of a budget process. We put our budgets together in the fall, and suddenly in January, we're facing a $600,000 increase that nobody saw coming because the admissions decisions from a year prior were made, and nobody knows how those are made. So the letter we sent them, and I believe copies were sent to the Finance Committee back in February, which feels like years ago now. One of the things we looked at was if you were to take either the community population or the student population within a community and use that as a benchmark to measure against, would you try to apportion the student body at the school to mirror the populations of the sending communities? Really just as one option. And that's what the subcommittee that Dr. Riccio referenced is going to be looking at is, are there parameters we could put in place to offer some budget predictability for our sending communities? But as she said, we could go alone and cap our own number of students, but our question for the school committee was, you should be looking at this district-wide and think about how that might look. And I will say the cities have a different set of concerns. I think they share our concern about the roller coaster. I mean, we've had years where our relative assessment has gone down. This year is an example where we've never seen it go up this much. Their concerns are a little different. The Salem and Peabody's concern is, what do the Salem kids attending Essex Tech reflect the Salem student population at large? And the answer is no, as far as they are concerned. So there's two questions. It's the apportionment of the student body, and it's the makeup of that student body, and does it reflect dissenting communities? So these are questions I think, we're focused more on the apportionment question, but both questions, and Essex Tech is not alone. These are questions being posed to regional and vocational schools across the Commonwealth because it's an issue that a lot of dissenting communities are facing.
Okay, thank you. Now, I just wanted to make sure I was clear. Are we or are we not under agreement with contract negotiations with the teachers? Anyone can answer that question. I
Sure.
just,
We
I
have,
wasn't sure when I was reading some of the budget.
we have a tentative agreement that the teachers have ratified, and then the school committee will vote on that at their June 8th meeting.
Okay, now I'm gonna, just a quick follow-up to that, and it goes back to what Mr. Daly brought up a few minutes ago. The step schedule, I'm not sure what do you got, 15, 16 steps? Is that is somewhere around there?
15.
15. Is that information available to the public? The
Our
step
teacher
schedule,
con- Yes, our teacher contract is on our website.
okay? And is the step schedule on the website?
Yes, it's part of the teacher contract.
Okay, all right, so basically I can look that up if I would like to, correct?
Yes.
All righty, thank you. All right, now, one item hit me, and it was I think it's on page E12, and it's concerning document cameras. Okay, and I think it was, you're going to be bringing them up to, you're gonna have to replace some or add some in certain buildings. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, now, the Smith School, I'm not sure what a document camera is. Is it something that's a permanent fixture, or is it something, I really don't know what that technology is. Could you, first of all, tell me what type of technology it is? And a follow-up to that would be, would the school, a Smith School, with the new Smith School going in, would they automatically be part of the construction, or is it something we'd have to purchase extra additionally anyway?
So I guess that's a nuanced question, is if it fits into the Smith School budget, we potentially would be able to buy it for the Smith School there. The end result is then that we pay for that over the course of 30 years with a certain amount of interest added on to it. And they are needed in all 5 of the elementary schools. So
But
sometimes we make the decision.
But it's not part of the building project as is.
It's not. It's a basically plugs in with the USB into the side of the computer.
Okay.
It almost becomes what a old overhead projector was, where you had the transparencies, but you can put a piece of student work under it to show a writing sample that a student had just done 5 minutes ago and show it to the class to go through and give feedback about how they could improve their own work.
Okay, that's probably what I thought it was. Page E14, you, I believe, mentioned that you're going to have to replace at some point over a period of a few years, 225 desktops. Is that correct?
Yeah, so each one of our classroom teachers have a desktop computer that they use as their main computer for projecting work, and using the smart boards, etc.
225 is a large number. What do you think that's going to be over a period? 1, 2, 3, 4 years? How do you phase that in?
I would say probably 3 years, I believe, is what the plan is, which would be about 80 a year, and that would fall under our tech warrant article, working with Colby.
Okay. All right. So that'll be, it's not a big one cost proposition, correct?
No, it'll be spread out because it makes it more sustainable for us in the long run.
Yes. Okay, could I take you to page A5? All right, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, or maybe last year. Are you with me now?
Yes.
Okay, I personally have a problem with them. I believe this is the achievement metrics external data section.
Yes.
I see at the end of grade 2, you expect 90% of the students will be reading at or above grade level. Now you go down to grade 5 in the math, and then you go down to grade 6 in ELA related to MCAS, and you go down to grade 8 at the middle school, you have 60%. So you're looking at 60% that you're expecting these students through MCAS testing be able to meet or exceed. All right. Now, if you stop right there, do you have any metrics, not that back up the 60%, but that to show you're doing better than 60%?
We would have the summative assessments and the assessments that teachers are doing, but and at the elementary level, so I'm looking at that piece of it, including the 5th grade, we do have benchmark assessments that we're using with students, but it does look different at middle school and then high school level. And that number is based on the state averages for MCAS. At our October school committee meeting, there was a presentation, and that is also on our website, and it will show you all of the data and where we are in comparison to what our goals are over the 5 years and where we are in comparison to the state level.
So if I'm understanding you, Lisa, would you be saying to me that your 60%, okay, that you're hoping the students can meet 60%, meeting or and exceeding, is that somewhere around where the state is too?
Yes, so for this past year, for example, the 5th grade math, the state was at 48%.
Right, right. The 5th grade math, correct?
Yes, the 5th grade math, the state was at 48 and the district was at 60.
Okay, all right. So basically you met that, I would say, goal, correct?
Yes, yes.
All right. Do you, again, back to the earlier conversation, do you have metrics that show you that you're actually exceeding the 60%?
It would be different metrics. So we do not do another test similar to MCAS, but with the assessments that our teachers are working on with our students, but we do not do another standardized testing. We don't have that in place.
No, I'm not asking you to do that. What I'm saying to you is, maybe I'm not explaining it correctly, but I have a problem personally with 60%. All right. Maybe it's because I'm really, really, really old school. All right. But I was wondering if you'd ever thought about trying to set the number at 70%, because maybe 70%, maybe you are already achieving 70%. Does that make sense?
It does, and we again based it on where we were with our MCAS and with what the state average was. So with the state in this past year being at 48 and the district was at 60. So as you said earlier, we did meet that. So as we move into the next 3 years of our strategic plan, we'll be reassessing that. Yes.
I'd like to see that go up myself. In other words, you know, goals, you want to attain that 60%. Obviously, you don't want to be less than that by any stretch of imagination. However, there's nothing wrong with putting the 70%. You meet the 70%, then you go to 75%. Now you're really accelerating. So that's the way I look at it. I just wanted to just run that by you a little bit. And, hopefully that maybe you would look that way, because now you get to grade 10 and you expect 90% of students to meet or exceed the grade 10 math, et cetera, correct? I mean, that's what your goal is. So,
we do, and we have to take into account that they are different tests. So
Yes.
the high school test is a graduation requirement for students.
Right.
So we need it to be there. We do look at grades 3 through 8 is the, I'll call it what we would say in our normal assessment would be a formative assessment. That's where the students are gaining that experience along the way to be prepared to have that success at the high school level.
Okay. All right. That gives me some idea. Maybe we can talk further about that at some point. Now, the last thing I had, I think it's, I know, it was a question actually I had mentioned to Steve Bartha, Mr. Bartha, with the situation the way it is now, schools closed, the children aren't taking part in all kinds of activities aside, in addition to all the academic work. It's a sad thing, but has there been any thought process towards actually reimbursing parents for some of the costs that are incurred due to schools not being open, such as bus fees, all kinds of athletic activities fees? Have you talked about that at all?
The school committee did speak about that at our May school committee meeting. And I'd ask Keith to elaborate on the decisions that were made in the progress.
Thank you.
So all of our spring sports fees have been reimbursed or in the process of getting reimbursed. As a lot of us know, it takes 4 to 6 weeks for us to get checks out often, so families might not have received those yet, but they are in process. And then refunding 1/3 or for the equivalent of 1/3 bus fee. So for each family, for each child, $60 back for that. So those are, again, we've started that process this week. It is for that. It's a 800 to 1,000 transaction. So it is taking our office a little bit to get through, create the backup, and get the information entered. But we've started that process.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm pleased that you're doing that. And that concludes my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I just have one question, Dr. Dana. Can you just explain Project Lead the Way? I just don't know what that is, and I'm curious.
Thank you. Project Lead the Way is, as I would say, a standard-based, research-based program that really has students doing real life, real world type of learning. So we have it in different areas now in our sciences, and we continue with training and grants. It also helps us with our college and career readiness and our innovative pathways for students.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right. If Jen could unmute everyone, I'd be certainly happy to entertain a motion on the school budget.
May I, before you take the vote, may I just reiterate something that's been mentioned in passing a couple times that I just want to make it clear in terms of the warrant for next week.
Yes.
So at the beginning of the evening, we talked a little bit about the out-of-district special ed costs being a budget driver this year and something we'll have to address in the next couple of years. And then Mike Daly asked the question about the $430,000 reflected in the 21 budget. And we're going to be, one of the budget transfers that we're going to be looking at as part of the warrant next week is a $677,000 transfer to make the current budget balance by the end of the year, and that is to absorb the cost that came into year for special ed. The reason that has an impact on FY21 is because by making the budget transfer this year, it frees up circuit breaker money that we would have otherwise had to use this year to balance the budget, and that money can be used to support the FY21 budget, which in turn will allow us to get into FY22. So it's really kind of this cost is going to be spread over 3 fiscal years, and the point is simply that voting the budget tonight as presented will essentially be a precondition for voting the budget transfer next week, because if the budget transfer next week does not happen, the circuit breaker money will not be sufficient to cover the next 2 years. It's very complicated, and I probably did a much worse job of explaining that than Keith would have. I just wanted to point simply that the transfer next week is linked to the vote tonight, in that circuit breaker is the fallback for both. That probably makes no sense because it's 9:30 at night, but it's the best I can do.
I think that was an outstanding 9:30 p.m. description. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we could get unmuted and
Sorry, I'm laughing.
Okay, that is there a motion?
I move to adopt the budget as presented.
Thank you, Sally. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Gina. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. I again like to thank Anna and her staff, as well as the members of the Danvers School Committee who are with us this evening. It is now after 9:30. We do have a second night scheduled, and I would certainly entertain a motion to adjourn right now and reconvene tomorrow at 6 p.m. To continue on with the general government budgets.
People
Oh, there we go. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, we'll see everyone tomorrow here again at your own private residence at 6 p.m.
Thank you all very
Just for
much.
the,
Good night.
can I make a quick public
Question.
service announcement before everyone
Yeah.
jumps off?
Yeah.
Sure,
right.
go ahead, Steve.
We have, we're batting 3 out of 8 right now for compliance with the ethics training refresher. So I would like to make a plug. Since we let you out early tonight, you now have time to switch to a different web page on your computer and take your ethics training for the year. And then as a second reminder, I will be sending a meeting link out tomorrow morning to the Finance Committee members for tomorrow night's meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.